I want to call this meeting of the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee to order. My name is John McLennan. I serve as chair of TSDAC, and I'm the chairman of the James City County Board of Supervisors, representing the Virginia Association of Counties on this presentation. And ask the vice chair to introduce herself.
Good morning, Cindy Mester, vice chair, as the chair indicated, representing VML, and my day job is deputy city manager for the city of Falls Church. I'm glad to have parked.
Sam Stink of GRTC. I'm the VTA representative, or one of the VTA representatives.
I'm Dan Sonnenklar. I'm a statewide transit planning manager with the RPT.
Jim Dyke, McGuire Woods Consulting, senior advisor, and I'm not quite sure who I'm representing.
You represent the RPT.
Represent the situation.
I'm Brian Beatis. I'm the director of transit at Blacksburg Transit, and I am representing CTAB.
Jennifer, I'm the acting director of DRPT.
Grant Sparks, I'm the acting chief of public transportation for DRPT.
And I understand we have a new member of TSDAC who's joining us today.
We do. We have Dr. Ray Smoot, who is joining us remotely today. He's on the Commonwealth Transportation Board, represents the Salem District, and he is DRPT's third representative on TSDAC.
And any other DRPT staff who'd like to?
You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Neil Sherman, director of statewide transit programs.
Lauren Magnato, statewide program manager.
I'm Todd Horsley, I'm the director of Northern Virginia transit programs.
Erin?
I'm Mary Foster, and I'm Communications and Marketing.
She's making the magic happen electronically today.
And we welcome those who are joining us today virtually for this important meeting. I understand that we have a fair amount of business to accomplish today, as we will for the rest of the spring. We're going to start off with the Grant and Dan show, I think, and ask Grant if you would go ahead and update us on our work plan.
Sure. Miriam, if you could advance the slides. There we go. So we already, I'll just review the agenda. We already did introductions, so we'll skip that. I will cover the updated TSDAC work plan for 2022. We made some slight modifications from the last time we spoke with you all. I will walk through a few of the TSDAC statutory requirements just as a refresher. And then we'll get into the meat of this meeting where we will be going over the merit capital program. And that's when I will turn it over to Dan. He'll do an overview of our capital program currently, as well as review some DRPT recommendations. And we welcome a discussion during that portion of the presentation. If we need to, we can have a working lunch. I guess we'll just see how far we can get through. Lunch should be here around noon. We'll go over the next steps, and then we'll have public comment at the very end. Next slide. We can skip that, Miriam. And one more. Yep. So I mentioned we made some very slight modifications to the work plan based on our discussion last month. We heard from you that the transit strategic plans, we talked about potentially moving that up in our work plan and discuss that before we get into our operating assistance discussion. So we thought that was a good idea, so we moved that up. And so next month at the May meeting, we'll start with a FY23 budget and 6-year improvement program overview. The 6-year improvement program, the draft 6-year improvement program will be available in a couple weeks. So we want to give you all an idea of what's in that program. We'll then do a recap and a wrap up of our discussion from today. If there are any lingering issues that we need to discuss about the capital program, we can do that at the beginning of next month's meeting. We'll go into the transit strategic plans, and we will bring forward some DRPT recommendations for improving the current guidance for those strategic plans. And then we will use whatever time we have remaining in May to kind of tee up the discussion on the operating formula and identify some key issues that we've that we've discussed internally. Moving on to June, we will then bring forward some recommendations from DRPT staff for improving the operating formula. We'll have a work session. I think that's going to probably be very discussion-based at the June meeting. And then, again, any additional conversations will carry over into July. So as you can see, we're getting capital out of the way at the beginning. We'll knock out strategic plans hopefully next month, and then really roll up our sleeves and focus on operating for the rest of the meetings. Any questions about the work plan before we move along?
So once we've gotten through the July meeting, at that point, we'll then have the recommendations ready to move on to advance.
So in order to get everything before the Commonwealth Transportation Board and approved before we would go into our next application cycle, we would need to brief the board in a workshop session in September and take it for action in October. The board doesn't meet typically in November. So that's kind of our critical path. So we're trying to, like Grant said, we're trying to front load as much as we can so that we can have some float in the summer and take whatever time we need to, but try to hit that target of the September meeting. I do think it's better to try to take this as a package to the board instead of taking it in pieces, just the way the dynamics of the board are evolving or are going to change again as we see some board members rotate off later this summer. It is interesting that we have board members that were not on the board when we went through this whole development in 2018. So we do have some education to do as well as we talk about changing something. We have to bring some members who weren't part of that process up to speed as well.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
All right, slide. All right, so just a refresher on some of the TSDAC statutory requirements. Marion, if you could just go to the next slide. There are 3 specific references to TSDAC in state code. 2 of them are in the same section of the code, which talks about statewide prioritization of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. So this on the screen right now, it establishes TSDAC and TSDAC membership. So 2 members of TSDAC are representing the Virginia Transit Association. 1 represents the Community Transportation Association of Virginia. 1 represents Virginia Municipal League. 1 represents the Virginia Association of Counties. And then we have 3 DRPT representatives. DRPT also provides administrative support for TSDAC. This section of the code also defines the purpose of TSDAC, which is to advise DRPT in the development of the operating formula. It's very specific that it's the operating formula that this group advises. This group also elects a chair from its members, meets at least once per year, and holds at least 1 public meeting. Next slide. This section goes on to say that DRPT, in conjunction with TSDAC, shall develop a process for distributing operating assistance and incorporating service delivery factors into the transit development plans. Before the board can approve service delivery factors, and that's the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the director and TSDAC chair will brief House Appropriations, House Transportation, Senate Finance and Appropriations, and Senate Transportation regarding the TSDAC findings and the recommendations. And before redefining any component of the factors, the Commonwealth Transportation Board is required to consult with DRPT, TSDAC, and interested stakeholders and provide a 45-day public comment period. Those are fairly straightforward. The 3rd reference here is in a different section of the code, and the section of the code goes over the use of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. And this section says that service delivery factors for operating assistance are required to be evaluated every 3 years, which I think all of us are aware of. And then if redefined by the Commonwealth Transportation Board, they shall be published and made available for public comment at least 1 year in advance of being applied. So that's an important piece that I think we were going to talk to you all about.
Yeah, so when we went through this in 2018, I mean, I I know that the chair and vice chair have been with this longer than I have, longer than many of us in the room, went through the original development of the operating formula, which, walked through a lot of these process steps. In 2018, we had budget language that said you're going to be done by, I think it was July 1st of 2019. So we had a very, hard date, and we rolled all of those aspects of that reform package that was developed in concert with TSDAC out together by July 1st. We did capital first because we thought it was important to get that out before the application period. But if you'll recall, we actually modified the operating formula after the operating applications for the year were submitted. So not ideal, definitely not in keeping with language that's been in the code since the original beginning of TSDAC. We have had some inquiries from the Secretary's office and from the new administration about the merit formulas, what the process is for reevaluating the merit formulas. They're looking at that as well as SMART scale. One of the things that I know Grant shared with Secretary earlier this week is this, language that's in the code that provides this 1-year time frame, which really does push us out to fiscal year 25 before anything would take effect. I think at this point, we've been using we've had the operating formula in place since July 1st of 2019, but we've really only used it once because we've had to hold everything forward from the pandemic. So we really need to dig into the operating formula and figure out how to kind of disentangle ourselves from COVID and how we look at allocation of operating assistance, because we really have held things steady now for 3 years running. So I do anticipate that we may pursue some budget language or something to try to relieve us of this 1-year time frame, just because we are in a period where we're really not using anything other than 2019 data to allocate operating assistance, which I don't think is fair to the transit agencies, and it really isn't keeping with the spirit of the code itself. I say that as a may. It's something that certainly we need to take a look at, and we can discuss as we start looking at the operating assistance. But that lag, that 1-year lag, honestly, after what we did in 2018 in a short period of time, was not on my radar. And so I do think that does beg a question of, do we need to wait for that additional year? So anyway, we can do some things with budget language to work around that, if that is the desire of the administration and of TSDAC going forward. So lots of work to do this summer. I think capital is much more straightforward and clearer, and a good place to start.
I appreciate flagging one to refresh ourselves on the 2013.
Yeah, 12. Where's the resident historian? 12,
and then we picked it up. Yeah, got us going. That 1-year piece was quite a robust discussion at that time.
Went through the scars?
But the intent was to protect the transit agency, so we didn't flip a surprise at the last minute. So I think it bears the conversation, because if the intent was to assist the transit agencies, a delay may not. So I appreciate it being raised, and I like where you sort of landed, Jen, that we'll need to revisit it. So I want a parking lot this. We see where we go with the operating budget, and then, we'll either be in a position as TSDAC to support the administration and the staff or have a different opinion. But for me, I want to remember what the intent of that 1-year notice was. And if it's actually detrimental, then I think it's valid to look at it. I get input from our transit operators.
Yeah, I do think it has to be looked at in the lens that we have really only used the performance-based operating formula one time.
Yeah.
We had a transition year. We did that. We used the full formula once, and then we've just been on hold. And that, quite frankly, any of the transit folks can jump in and say they might disagree with me, but I don't think the way we're allocating the formula money right now reflects their current conditions. We did make some changes this year in terms of putting in updated operating expenditures, but everything else is still carrying forward numbers from 2019. And
I look forward to the discussion. I'm glad we're bringing strategic plan up and getting capital done so we can really delve into this. And if we decide it really needs to be changed, and if we do it in the budget, I would ask that we sincerely look at when we revisit it in code, because I hate doing stuff in the budget, because you got 1 or 2 years and then you're undoing whatever you do. My thoughts. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so that's all we have for the statutory requirements. I'm going to pass it off to Dan. Before I do, though, if anyone had a chance to review the slides, these next 30-some slides are pretty text-heavy. We're really diving into the current policy, CTB policy for merit capital, and so I've told Dan to try to take it as slow as possible. You're going to have to sometimes reread, the slides. So if at any point Dan's moving too fast, just let us know and we can just slow down.
And we affectionately in-house refer to Dan as the Wizard of Merit, because he is the one that is behind the curtain making the magic happen of all the analytics and data that goes into this very technical process. And he has been with us pretty much since the beginning of Merit, and he's done a fabulous job for us. So it's good to see him come forward with his recommendations for where we can start to make some improvements.
They let you out behind the curtain.
They did. Thank you for that introduction. That was very, very kind. Again, my name is Dan Sonnenklar. I'm going to be walking us through a couple of different approaches here to this presentation. The first part is going to be an overview of the current program, so we get everybody on the same page about what we're currently doing. And the second part is going to be about recommended changes. You probably all were able to look at what we distributed last week. Yes, it is text heavy. Part of that was so you all could read through it and understand the whole context of each of the pieces that we're recommending here. So please slow me down if you want to discuss any piece of this. I do ask, though, it would probably be easier to allow me to go through the whole overview first, and then we'll review questions about that. In the discussion section, we're going to have to stop at every one of the recommendations. With no further ado. All right, so this first slide just gives a very high-level snapshot of what we do in the prioritization process every year. So the first step of that process is filtering the projects or the applications that we get into 3 categories by project type. Those are state of good repair, minor enhancements, and major expansions. Within those, we then screen them for eligibility. And what that means is we look at the existing development plans, transit strategic plans, the annual update letters. We review a kind of cost backup, the review of open grants, and kind of a general check for readiness to implement in that process. And once that eligibility process is finished, all of those projects that are eligible are scored according to the methodology outlined here. It's also outlined in detail in the technical guide that's published online that we update every year. Once projects are scored, we then rank them in order, and then funding is allocated based on those that meet or exceed a threshold that is set annually. And there's a note here that the threshold is dynamic. Every year, it's based on the pool of projects that we get and the amount of funding that we have, very similar to how Smart Scale works. And so that is the general snapshot of what we do. We get very into the details when we do these reviews, but I just wanted to put that out there first before we get into all of these definitions that are to come. Next slide. So here we have the 3 different merit project categories: state of good repair, minor enhancements, major expansions. You will likely hear me refer to these as SGR, MIN, and MAGE. It's just easier to refer to those as you get into details here. But if there's any confusion about how I'm referring to the program, please stop me and ask me for clarification. But so state of good repair projects are projects and programs to replace or rehabilitate existing assets. And the state maximum match rate for those projects is 68%. minor enhancement group is projects and programs to add capacity, new technology, or a customer facility that meet a couple of different criteria measures here. The first is that the total project cost is $2 million or less. And then the second is that if it's a project for expansion vehicles, that it includes less than 5 vehicles or 5% of the, less than or equal to 5 vehicles or 5% of the fleet size, whichever is greater. The state match in that program also is a maximum of 68%. And finally, the major expansion program, programs or projects to add, expand, or improve service with a total project cost of more than $2 million. And then in the case of expansion vehicles, it's greater than 5 vehicles or 5% of the fleet. Okay. So these next few slides kind of break down how we generate scores for each of the categories. This here is an illustration of how we generate a state of good repair score. And for each of the projects that come through, we evaluate based on an asset condition score up to 60 points and a service impact score up to 4 points for a total of 100 points. Within the asset condition score, that is a mathematical calculation that compares the age or mileage, or age and mileage or age, we'll get into exactly how we do that, to the estimated service life of that asset. And the service impact score provides points based on the impact that each project could have on 4 criteria areas that are listed here: operating efficiency, frequency, travel time and reliability, accessibility and customer experience, and safety and security. So for the SGR projects, we generate scores from 2 categories. For the minor enhancement projects, we generate just from the 1 service impact score category. It's the same as for the SGR projects, but we do not bring in that asset condition score. So a little more detail on the asset condition. So for vehicles, the rating score is the average of the age and mileage-based scoring system. So we consider 50% of the score, or we derive 50% of the score from mileage and 50 from age. For non-vehicle assets, we can only use the age. The notes here are actually probably the more important part of this slide, and it's where we set our estimated service lives from. So the asset age and mileage is compared to the expected service life, which SDA has given us as a standard for minimum service lives for various different transit assets. In this program, each individual vehicle that is applied for replacement is evaluated separately, whereas non-vehicle assets are looked at as a whole project. Now, when you get into things like computers and desktops and things like that, we sometimes do break those down individually as well if they all have different ages. So that's kind of how we derive that. Next slide. So this is the current scoring schedule for age and mileage within the SGR program. Again, this is only for SGR. Points are awarded to assets that have reached or exceeded 95% of their estimated service level. So you'll see in this chart here, the second row down, if something is within 5% of the ESL for age and mileage, it derives 30 points in each category and then scales up from there, up to 60 points. The service impact scores are a little bit different. So these consider the impacts that the asset will have on service and to what extent an asset affects the rider experience. The key piece here is that measuring service impact is a qualitative exercise. Points are assigned based on a determined level of impact to service quality by project subtype that are preset in this program. There's also additional points or additional considerations that are available that are based on specific characteristics and some agency-wide performance metrics as well. Again, I just reviewed these are the 4 criteria areas. Next slide. So within each of those criteria areas, each project type that you'll see on the next slide is assigned a high, medium, low, or no impact rating within each of those, which each derive a different level of points. So high level, it gets 8 points, medium, 5, low, 2, and no impact is 0. projects within the service impact score, projects automatically receive the minimum score for each of those criteria based on that impact level. And that last point is what I kind of just described. So you can go to the next slide where it illustrates the current array of scoring. So there's a lot in this table. I'll try to go through it quickly, but we can stop. We'll have questions here too. So this is the current default service impact score schedule. Ranks from projects that score the highest to projects that score the lowest. Currently, we have 12 unique project types in the program. And you'll see here that vehicles, whether it's replacement or expansions or rehabilitation, they score high marks across the board. They're always consistently our highest scoring projects within the service impact score. In the middle range, we have maintenance equipment, system infrastructure, technology for ITS and communications, also technology or equipment for operating support, and projects that have an impact on administrative or maintenance facilities. Those kind of score in the middle range of the program. And then at the low end, we have projects that include bus stops and shelter improvements, support vehicles, and technology for onboard safety, technology and equipment for administrative support. And so those total default scores going down the side are an aggregate of the high, medium, or low ratings that they get in each criteria areas. Does that make sense? All right. Next slide. In order to differentiate based on specific characteristics of a project, these additional considerations are used to adjust the default scores. So what happens here is that within the 4 criteria areas, there are a number of points available to projects certain characteristics or for agencies that have performance metrics that meet a certain mark. Within the operating efficiency, for example, if there is a facility project that includes LEED certified buildings, they would receive an additional point. If replacement of a vehicle is going to be with an electric or hybrid vehicle, they would receive 1 point and so on. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but we will get back into this later when we get into some of the recommendations that we're looking at. So for slide projects, the minor enhancement ones, these next few slides get into expansion projects, which is a much more complicated process that is kind of based on smart scales, or at least the factor areas that go into smart scale scoring. So we evaluate each project based on metrics that address each of the 6 factor areas of the smart scale program. So those are congestion mitigation, economic development, accessibility, safety, environmental quality, and land use. And within each of those, we spell out the measure here of what we look at each time. So within congestion mitigation, we look at the change in peak ridership attributed to the project. That's the key piece there. Within economic development, we look at consistency with regional and local economic development plans and policies, and support from local development activity. Within the accessibility factor area, we actually look at 2 different measures that we weigh at 50% each. The first is projected improvements in accessibility to jobs, to workforce development, and to other non-work destinations. And the second is looking at disadvantaged populations that are within walking distance of said project. Within safety, we look at how this contributes to improving safety and security. Within environmental quality, we look specifically at the reduction in vehicle miles traveled as a proxy for air quality improvements. And within the interest category, we look at transit supportive land use served by the project that we are evaluating. So it's a much more robust exercise of projecting how these projects will perform. The prioritization criteria within each of the 6 areas is also weighted differently for 4 different area-based categories. And these reflect the original weights of the Smart Scale program. So category A would refer to our largest urban areas of Northern Virginia, Fredericksburg, and Hampton Roads. Category B Richmond, Charlottesville, and Roanoke. C is other small urban areas throughout the state, and D would be all rural areas. The weights for the different categories are illustrated below. So in category A, the greatest weight is placed on congestion mitigation, where in category C, for example, much more even across the board, with higher weight placed on economic development, accessibility, and safety. So that should be relatively familiar to all of you. And so, finally here, in order to calculate the benefit scores and the merit scores is what we use to actually rank these, we follow 4 broad steps. First is within each of the factor areas, we take a raw measure and we normalize that against a maximum value to create a 0 to 100 score that can be compared across the board. We then apply measure weightings and those area weightings, and those weighted measures are then added up to produce a benefit score, which really just summarizes all of the benefits defined by these metrics. And then the final step is that the benefit score is divided by the cost in 10 millions, and we derive a merit score that way, that we compare these across. So it really is a cost-benefit analysis involved in here. And that is my last slide describing how we currently perform scores. And I'm happy to take any questions on any of these pieces, clarify anything.
So this is a good point to ask if anybody has any questions about the way the formula has been operating, the weights that are placed on different criteria.
Would you go back to the slide that looked at the 4 different categories, perhaps, I guess, coming out of SMART scale or something?
Yeah, so I think that's slide 13. Are you referring to the 6 factor areas?
Yeah, I'm referring, no, keep going. Look at the one that has the map of the Commonwealth on it.
Right, the one that has the 4 categories, categories A, B, C, and D.
I see, yeah, this one.
Right. Now, I'm just trying to understand, for example, if you look at Lynchburg, it's in category C. If you look at Charlottesville, it's in category B. Lynchburg has a greater population area than Charlottesville. So what's going on there?
That's a great question, and these weightings were taken from the original SMART scale technical guidelines, and so those were set as part of the SMART scale program. And I'm not sure I can speak to exactly why that was set that way, but
they were discussed at the MPOs and
okay.
Other regional commissions.
Okay.
That was a part of the discussion at the New River Valley one.
I see.
10 years
Yeah,
ago.
and my recollection, and could be wrong, is that in the New River Valley, part of the New River Valley is in one category and another part of it is in a different category. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. Yes.
But that's not reflected here, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you referring to the updated SMART scale weightings that are in the current program? Because
yes.
Our weightings reflect the original weightings here. And we're
okay.
actually going to get to this in a moment when we get to the proposed changes. We have not updated this because this is our first opportunity to do so.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll just mention that Jamie Jackson's joined us as well. Jamie, good to see you this morning.
And Chair, I think it was helpful to go back through this, and I'm still going back and forth on the slides because we've got the nice flow chart of the 2 arrows that equals, but then within it, there's so many subs, so it's still really important to think through how it flags. So like as you were going through, Dan, I was thinking about our previous discussion about accessibility, so I was paying attention to where we scored and how we weighted it, and then the point about we're using the original SMART scale versus the current, so if things have changed, it leads in nicely to have the framework. It's still really hard to grasp, even though we have all the slides and it's dense. And I keep trying to think how to get a better flow chart so you see how all these sub-points work, and
Yeah, it is difficult, and I think if you go back a couple slides, the ones with the arrows, go back two or three more slides to, sorry, keep going. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a nice graphic way of describing this, but it does not get at the subtlety within it.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to, because there's within each of these provisions, there's a ton of detail. And so you really do, like when presenting this, it's a challenge to come up with a high level summary like this and then break down what's within it. And there may be a way to approach this graphically in the future as well, in a better way.
That's what I was thinking about, because I love this graphic because you get it and you can remind yourself how it flows for state of good repair, and then, you know, something similar for mid and then major. But you're right, those service and impact scores in particular have a lot of nuance and weighting. And so is there a way to have, like, this is the main one and then a whole out that breaks down, that it's still, it makes me think of the, I don't know, the VDOT placemat is what we call it when we're thinking about all the roads and the other bridge kind of resources of grants and everything. It's a ledger-sized sheet, but it's all on one.
Right.
So is there some way to do that?
It would kind of be combining this with what we saw on slide, I don't know what they are, the one with the service impact score.
Yeah. 11.
Well, this one would go into the SGR one, of course, but
Yeah.
Keep going forward. This is really the meat of it. And so, yeah, it would be difficult to do, but I think we could explore it if you think it would be helpful.
And this one, you see, when you talked about it, you could see the high, medium, and low, and maybe there's just a way to kind of group them graphically. So a bit of a challenge I totally get, but as you were walking through it, which was really a good way to refresh us where we are, well, if we change it, it'd be nice to be able to graphically show that change.
I noticed.
Challenge.
Keep that in mind.
Well, and I just wonder, I may have missed it in all these wonderful slides that we have coming up, but might be useful to have a slide at the beginning of this next section that talks a bit about some of the factors that have affected our entire consideration of this matter, including COVID and changes in the smart scale and the concern over accessibility, the equity.
Yeah, because that's a big driver as well. I mean, it sort of came out of COVID, but without COVID, I think we would be having improved.
And to help us just as we go through to think about some of the things that have affected framework that was in place.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, especially as we carry these kinds of changes forward to larger policy boards and things like that.
Yeah, and there may be some color themes that could tie into it. So some of these categories tie back to accessibility or, certain policies, if they all showed up as, green. But, we got the blues and teals here, so what would change with that?
Certainly.
And then,
certainly something to think
about. Yeah, this is totally a logistics technical thing, but I think we have an open mic, and so every once in a while I'm getting some sound effects, and it makes me hard to hear. And simply because I have a hearing aid on this side, which is picking up that noise. So I was going to see if that's something where it's an open mic or if there's anything we can do. Because I don't remember hearing that in previous meetings.
They could use their mic.
Thank you, Chair. Just a technical thing, just because it happens.
Would it help to switch to the other side in the short term?
No, I'll just turn this way a little bit. I'm so used to being to your right, I don't know what I'd do if I was with him.
On slide 11, can we go back to that? Could you go over kind of how, sorry, maybe it wasn't 11.
Oh, yeah.
They combine.
Sorry.
The one with the SDR and then, I think that was it.
I'm sorry. I'm jumping all over the place. The big
table.
Yeah,
the big table.
In here it's slide 20.
So how, when you guys were devising these kind of, was the strategy to first look at the different project types and kind of rank those in your mind, and that sort of led you to kind of how you assigned the different columns as to high, medium, low? Or did you look at each individual project type and really say, this operating efficiencies, high, medium, low, this, and this, and then they kind of fell where they fell?
It was more the latter, but I will say that this was, and I wasn't here for the process of developing this table. I came on shortly after this being kind of accepted or adopted. From what I understand about this process is it went from being a much larger list of types of projects to, I think, a smaller list than this, and then this was the final list that was kind of decided upon. And the reason why it was whittled down from that large list was because there just simply wasn't that much difference between a lot, like if you had 45 projects in here, there's maybe a 1 point difference. And so the idea here was to put it into buckets of things that we normally see, and then using some best practices research and some just background that we had our consultant team provide us with, we were able to set these high, medium, and lows. And so I don't believe that it was known that, the projects were going to fall where they fall on this chart. So yeah, more based on how we actually estimate the impact.
Okay. And are we going to get into this level of granularity when we talk about the proposed changes?
Yep.
Yeah, we're going to be proposing an update to this table. And then this table, this is, in my opinion, is one of the most important ones because it really shows what types of projects we end up funding. Down at the bottom, the administrative technology, every year that we've gone through merit, we rarely, I don't know if we've ever really funded those types of projects, but the vehicles obviously are always the top scorers.
One clarification on that. We've funded those as SGR projects because this is just one part of the scoring.
Right.
So if they were old enough to derive a high asset condition score, they would often be high enough to pass the threshold. On the minor enhancement side, we've never funded administrative technology. So that's another subtlety of the dynamics here that maybe was not necessarily apparent the way that I walked through this, is that, remember, this applies to both state of good repair and minor enhancement projects. It's 40% of a state of good repair score, and it's 100% nearly of a minor enhancement score.
And that's where the graphic for me makes a difference, because you miss those connections as we just logically go through content slides.
Mm-hmm.
But as you describe that and talking about how we got to the default chart and what we fund, that's a real policy decision. Early on, we knew we had vehicles. We had way past end-of-life vehicles, so we were making a policy decision about that. And Jen, I think you brought that up at our last meeting, and we always hope to get back to not just ordering them just in time, but in advance. But are the vehicles still the priority? If so, this works. If we need to change it because we're not funding things, so I look forward to the recommendations. But again, having this refresher is a good baseline.
I would say that we are funding the things that are a priority for the state to fund based on this. And I also think we talked about it recently, and I think we may have talked about it last month at TSDAC as well. I think the quality of the applications that we've received has significantly improved over the last 4 years. Some of the things that would come in as an application now that, very administrative things that, quite frankly, should probably be part of an operating budget, small things that were coming in as capital requests that kind of filter to the bottom when you look at that administrative stuff. We don't get those applications anymore. What we get are things that are tied to an asset management, a capital plan, a transit development plan. When you hit that line down there at the bottom with administrative, there's a fuzzy line between capital and operating at that point. So I feel like we are funding the right things, and the majority of our program is vehicles. I think where we have an opportunity to maybe do some more is around, the customer amenities, things like shelters and benches, and how we can leverage transit capital with other sources to make that, pedestrian accessible. We can't do pedestrian accessibility projects, but we can, leverage our resources with other resources that may be available to the transit agencies through Smart Scale or through other programs, to help look at how transit service is provided in a more holistic manner. That's where we have a real opportunity, and I think you'll see that the recommendations the team is bringing forward.
And that's partly why we tied back to Smart Scale with some of our bases. One, there was some research and there was some built around the economics and accessibility, but if you have compatibility of scoring, it helps you leverage and match up programs. Smart Scale, revenue sharing are two potentially big ones.
Anyone else? Questions or comments?
All right. We can move on to the workshop portion of this meeting today. We get into the proposed changes. So this is really, these slides are very text heavy, but I will just frame this by saying that these recommendations are high-level changes to the CTB policy. The CTB policy is what we base our technical guidelines on. And so because of that, we tried to concentrate on some language changes and some scoring changes that are referenced specifically in there. So the first recommendation here is to edit the definitions of the three program categories of state of good repair, minor enhancement, and major expansion. So you'll find this approach throughout the presentation, that there's a recommendation followed by a rationale. And then some of the recommendations have some supporting slides behind them. And so this one has two after that will describe exactly what I'm getting at here. But the rationale behind this is that it's been difficult to ensure that all projects are evaluated according to the guidelines as they're written today. It's been particularly problematic for these large facility replacement projects that we see that are, that exceed $2 million, and for technology projects that exceed $2 million. The current category definitions would indicate that a large facility replacement could be scored as SGR. However, all facility replacements always have some sort of expansion, or if not, an enhancement of some sort. And so they really do fit into the concept of our major expansion category. Beyond that, the current definitions also have indicated that large technology projects that cost over $2 million should be considered major expansion projects, when in reality they don't really impact all the time. They don't always impact service provision or expanding service, and so they're very difficult to score as a major expansion project. And we had one that we scored that way a few years ago. And so next slide. This is just a refresher of what we went over of the current category definitions within the CTB policy. And the next slide, which is the one I'll concentrate on, highlights in red what we are proposing as far as changes to those definitions. And so in the state of good repair category, it's essentially the same capital projects or programs to replace or rehabilitate an existing asset, but add the provision that we are excluding major capital construction projects with a total cost over $2 million. And that way, that will indicate that those projects should be considered major expansion projects. Within the minor enhancement category, the recommendation here is to broaden the definition, whereas in the past, we're going to do this a little bit on some of these. The current definition is projects and programs to add capacity and new technology or customer enhancements. The new definition would be to add capacity or include the purchase of new assets that meet those criteria below. And so it's not just saying it's technology or customer enhancements, it's really all new purchases that are under $2 million for the expansion vehicles less than or equal to 5 vehicles or 5%. And then we're also wanting to add all projects for engineering and design here. And so that is a subtlety that is not necessarily spelled out in the overview that I just gave, but we fund engineering and design plans within the minor enhancement program. And so this would just be spelling that out formally.
Yep. May I ask a question?
Yes.
All projects for engineering and design. So there's no cap on how much that might cost?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the reason for it is because even if it's an expensive engineering and design project, because of the way that the major expansion scoring works, where you divide by cost, it makes it very difficult to evaluate an engineering and design project on an equal playing field as those larger construction projects. Essentially, all of the engineering and design would score extremely high in that program because the cost is so much lower.
And around the same time that we went through merit, but separate from merit, we had changed our guidance around how we wanted to handle these major capital projects. What we were seeing is we would see, an agency, and it wasn't anybody in particular, it was kind of across the board, where they'd come in and they'd ask for a certain amount of money this year for a facility. And then they would ask for a certain amount of money the next year. And so and over a period of time, they might have 5, 6 grants for the same project. And we never knew, and we could never tell the board what we were getting into with that project. And so we have slowly started, and Brian's got a project right now. It's probably one of the first ones that went through a multi-year grant process where we said, come to us with what your vision is and what your cost is, so we know what we're buying into, and we'll put it under a multi-year agreement. And then that way, we've taken some risk off the state by saying we're going to agree to fund you over this period of time for this amount, but the risk is on the transit agency to manage that capital project in a way that they bring it in on budget. Look at Brian, because I know that it has not been without its challenges, but it's led to some good decision-making using value engineering. I mean, and your project's about a $40 million project. I mean, it's a significant project, and it's helping us make better decisions and better recommendations. It's helping the transit agencies and local governments make better decisions. So separate from merit, we had built this different process for capital projects where we said we want to do a study first, then we want to do engineering to 30%. And when you get to 30%, you've got a good idea about what it's going to cost. And this is some of what we learned from Blacksburg, is you have to have a certain amount of engineering done before you know how much, before you have a good feeling about whether your estimate is solid. And that's the point. We want to make that commitment, that multi-year commitment, once that information is in hand. And
Sure.
Going through this process for a few years, what we found was merit's great, but merit didn't fit that process. And so people were struggling with what's the right time to come in as a major expansion. And so the ability to fund that upfront engineering and design up to like 30% and do that as a minor enhancement project, and then come in when you know what you're going to build, what your needs are, what it's going to cost as a major expansion project, evaluate it once, and then fund it out as a multi-year project makes more sense for us than for the transit agency.
Sure, and I'm okay with that. I mean, engineering and design in very round numbers is going to be about 10% of a project budget, I think. So practically anything that exceeds the $2 million number on engineering and design obviously is going to result in a major expansion capital project when the actual project comes along. But I'm okay with that, recognizing that it enhances the planning process.
Yeah, well, the point I was going to make is thinking back to the education side. I know we do that a lot with budgeting. You need to know exactly how much it's going to cost, and at some point you have a better idea of what the long-term cost is, as opposed to sort of buying into it early, and all of a sudden you get hit with a cost somewhere down the line. So I think that's moving. I think that's a good approach.
Yeah, and at the same time, we are beefing up our engineering staff and our ability to provide technical support early in the process, so that we're all in a good place when an agency comes in, because these are big projects. Potentially, they can be very large projects. When you're talking about a multimodal transfer facility or a big maintenance and operations facility, they're big projects, and so to kind of step through a logical process and mitigate the risk on us and on the agency.
Does that also anticipate that maybe some jurisdictions that have less facilities or less capacity than others to do planning?
Yes.
Yeah. Some assistance to help do that?
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the things we're trying to do earlier in the process. And We have a new engineering manager, somebody that I worked with at VDOT that's got a lot of experience in, particularly in construction. And so he's come in with some new ideas. WADA has a couple of projects, Chair McGlennon, in your backyard, and, they don't, transit agencies, a highway agency, local government, they might build, civil projects all the time. But for a smaller transit agency like Williamsburg, they may build a couple of facilities and they may not build another facility for 20 years. And so they don't have that technical capacity. And so our ability to help them, not do it for them, but help advise them, guide them, I feel like is a really important role for the state to help them be successful. And
Sure.
so that's definitely something that we want to do. And I think that then also feeds into this and helps us get better applications up front and projects that are well thought through and ready to be funded, so that we get a project, we get an application in, it's funded, and it's built out.
It also provides an opportunity for states and to see that, hey, you're doing something here and X, Y, and Z did it over there a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can help you fashion it so that it's more effective and more efficient, and maybe even there might be some ability to combine some of these things in the sense that you can have some savings there too. So
Absolutely.
I see a lot of advantages in it.
Yeah.
Chair? Comment and a question. So what you all are describing is exactly what localities do in our capital planning. It's a multi-year project, and I have to tell you, I would tell my public works director to go back and work on it if they just came in with me with the planning money and not the whole multi-year piece, because I need to know what our debt capacity and liability is. So I think there's benefits to this concept both ways. The question is, with these changed definitions, would you see changes in how applications are scored in funding, or does it just clarify it so it's easier for the applicant to submit it right and be scored, and you all can score it and not go, oh, it's gray, I need to flip it this way or that way?
It is mostly the latter, right? So it's providing clarity to kind of how we've made things fit today. It's providing clarity through the definition. The last part on here, which I didn't get to yet, which is the adding the language to allow the DRPT director to determine the project category for projects that don't conform, could lead to a different way of scoring. So an example here is these large technology projects that have an implication of over $2 million, but that don't have impact necessarily, or a clear impact on expanded ridership. So we ended up scoring a major expansion project for a $4 million technology project, and had to kind of figure out a way to make the scoring work for that. When in reality, it really fits much better within the minor enhancement category. And so that would be the only change here that would allow the scores to be different, or would indicate a different score in the end. But the other changes are really just the definitions and clarity.
Can I pull that a little bit more? So using that example, did you score it as major, so you forced it into major?
Mm-hmm.
So then we're looking at sort of the smart scale, economic accessibility versus service impact and asset.
That's right.
And really that change is just to give us a little bit of flexibility,
Exactly.
so that when something doesn't make sense, we can make a decision here to keep things moving forward and evaluate projects in a way that's, best for makes the most sense for the project at hand. And it's really only intended to be those outliers.
Yeah, and it's happened.
Maybe once.
Yeah.
And so as an administrator of programs, I like that language.
Okay.
As a policy maker, governing body,
Don't like that.
no, it's way too broad, anything can happen. So I don't have an answer to that, but I'm thinking that it needs to capture what you were saying, that exceptional, is it just the dollar amount that triggers it, or is it because it really, the scoring is better as a service impact and asset quality? So it's not just determine which category, but it's determine which category based on either dollar amount or impact or some qualification, but not as tight. Like I'm saying, I'm wearing both the hats. State TSDAC policy, but back home when I'm doing capital projects, I love that kind of language.
Yeah. For sure, but yeah, that we can look at the language and more narrowly define it. But yeah, it's interesting that the dynamics of how that would play out. A very cheap project scores very well as a major expansion, and it's we can make them fit, but it doesn't really make that much sense.
And it doesn't really represent what the value of the project is.
Yeah.
Overall.
Exactly.
So that's why I think the scoring piece, listening to you describe that one example was helpful, because I think there could be just some basic clarification as to what the outcome or the desire is without making it narrow too much.
Do you envision this having much impact in terms of the distribution of funding into the different categories?
No, it's really just around the edges.
Okay.
Chair, I just had, for the state of good repair and major enhancements for the facility. I'm not sure I'm totally sold on that adjustment. I actually probably think it's more of a bad idea, especially if you're doing a retrofit to a facility. Haven't seen a lot of plans in like forever, but that's a retrofit, and getting 68% versus 50% in an agency that is that small is a huge deal. So I'm not sure if we're building a lot of buildings, but I would just say from my perspective, I think there is a threshold between a major expansion construction project versus one that should actually go in state of good repair. Fred's facility is actually built on like an old Greyhound bus station, and we still have the same like painted nasty bathroom. So, you know, for me, if I do an add-on to my facility because I get the church property next door, maybe that's a major construction if I buy that property and build something. But if I do an add-on, which may cost me $1 million or $1.5 million, that would be for me to try to fix something that's currently wrong in my facility.
Right.
I wouldn't want it to go into a major expansion because it's just not.
Certainly, and I think what this is addressing is a complete replacement of a facility. So if you were to pursue a renovation of a facility, that would generally fit into the minor enhancement category. It's when it hits up against the $2 million threshold that it becomes a little bit more.
So I would clarify then what you're saying, because that's not what you're saying. So let's say I do 2.1 million because this facility, concrete is high. So how would you do that? Would that go into the major expansion, or would that go into state of good repair?
So this, it would likely actually go into the minor enhancement program. So the language at the bottom also would allow us to make a determination on something that maybe is just above the threshold to allow it to fit into the category that it would score the best and the easiest, so we can evaluate in the interest of the agency.
So what I'm giving you now is just something that gets you on the fringe. If I get you to 3 million, so again, I'm just saying clarify your language, because what I'm hearing may not benefit the transit agencies when we're doing something that is a small adjustment, relatively small adjustment to a facility when you count engineer and design, which is going to cost me $250,000 for a retrofit, and then I do construction for that place. So I would just make sure when you are talking about construction and what it looks like, you may even want to include it in multiple categories, so you don't want to give your staff flexibility to say, hey, it's a retrofit. We'll give you a little bit more money because we know it's already there, versus a major expansion, which, you know, for me is close to new construction or new construction on a current plot of land. So that would just be my recommendation for clarifying the language there. I'm also still a little confused about Blacksburg on how this project, like your project is multiple phases, how that would fit into this, because like I'm surprised it would not fit.
So the Blacksburg project was not multiple phases. It was done as one grant, and so I want to make sure I was clear in what I said. The projects we would see come in with multiple grants are not phased. They were one project, but instead of coming in and applying for the project, they would come in and apply for an amount of funding that never lined up with a total cost for a project that was envisioned.
Okay.
And it had nothing to do with phasing. So you can still do phasing. you want to do a facility project and it's a retrofit and you can do it in different phases, that you can still apply that way. The Blacksburg project's a brand new facility.
Okay. So it's not phasing implementation, but there's development phases. You got the concept plan, you got the engineering, you got the.
What we saw didn't even have that.
Oh, yeah.
I'll leave that one alone because those were, and some of those projects sadly are still on the books where you'll see 5, 6, 7 grants for the same project, and they have a definition associated with them, a scope associated with them, and then we end up having to rescope those projects because the money's not in the right bucket. If it followed a logical development phase, I would see that differently, but that wasn't the practice.
Yeah, it really needs to be one project.
We really need to know what your project is.
I explore, make sure I understand Jamie's point a bit. So I went back to the original slide numbers 4. So it has the basic definition of state of good repair, minor and major. With the match, because that's an important piece, because this is why that graphic for me works, because you see the implications. We changed the definition and we put a project in a different category. We just changed the match requirements, which is often important to a locality. So in state of good repair, that is supposed to be projects or programs to replace or rehab an existing asset. So now we're specifically adding a definition excluding major capital construction. Is it capital construction for replace and rehab, just to be clear, versus is a major expansion? So,
Right.
That's what I'm trying to clarify too, is because, for example, if I add an electric component to my facility building, so even water facility, we've got C&G there, but if you add something to allow for the electrification of vehicles, that is going to cost you, just the facility alone, it may cost you, I don't know, $300,000, maybe $1 million, depending on what craziness it is. And then you add a vehicle bay to that. That gets you over the $2 million, and now you're a major expansion? No, I don't want that. Just because that's not what it is. You're doing a retrofit, which is replace or rehabilitate. So as long as it's covered under Jennifer's world, Jim's world, I will be happy to say, okay, great. But I just know that it may just come up of unintended consequences by saying that something over $2 million is major, because $2 million now for construction is 50 cents.
So under the current definitions, construction over $2 million is considered major. And so what we figured these changes would do would give us the flexibility to determine the correct project category depending on the characteristics of that project. And that's really what that last provision allows us to do. So if we do analyze a project that comes in that has a $3.4 million price tag, it doesn't automatically go into major expansion. We can look at it and determine if it doesn't fit there. And so under the current definitions, it's much clearer that anything over $2 million is going to be major expansion. And so we're boosting that a little bit.
yeah, because the major definition is projects or programs to add, expand, or improve service that's over $2 million.
Yeah.
So a whole new energy module piece is going to be expand or improve service, and so it would trigger. It was over $2 million as capital.
That's a major expansion.
Major
expansion.
I think that goes back to your policy language, and then we can move on.
Yeah.
But I would, argue that expand or improve service would be relative to me. What I'm trying to do, if I'm doing that electrification component, I'm literally trying to replace existing gas infrastructure because I'm trying to get state-of-good repair money. So, again, as long as there's discretion, people can fight that fight.
And I'll just throw in, if you'll recall, what's in the code is 2 categories, state of good repair and major expansion. And when we started trying to figure out what the line was, we realized that it wasn't a line, it was kind of a gray area. And that's how we ended up with minor enhancement. I think we're still saying there's a little bit of gray area, but we've captured most of it. And I think, there's, like Dan said, there's 1 or 2 projects we've really struggled with. But overall, we've made this work for 4 cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still think we're nibbling around the edges of outliers. We had projects that came in this year too from the city of Charlottesville that were facility projects that were submitted as major expansion projects that weren't ready for time. I'm not saying anything that isn't out there because I briefed the CTV subcommittee on it, or Grant briefed the CTV subcommittee on it. Or did I? I can't even remember. Maybe it was me. But they weren't ready for prime time, and instead of just saying, no, you're not ready for prime time, we said, let's go back, rescope what you're asking for, and put you in a minor enhancement project, which really gave them more than what they were asking for because we gave them engineering and design at 68% so that they could come back in. So when Dan and the team are looking at these projects, they're trying to find ways to make it work.
Yeah.
And that's been our commitment from day one. And so I think what we're trying to do is provide a little bit more clarity, but we're still, at the end of the day, are going to find a way to make it work. Yeah. Even the one, it was an HRT project that came in, it was like a $3 million technology project. We made it work in the major expansion the process, and it got funded. So it scored wonderfully. We have found a way to make those things work, and we'll continue to do that. And so,
the only piece I'd add to the discussion here is on this potential language that might kind of in your back pocket some response to an expectation that this be limited in some way.
Yeah.
Sort of a broad granting of authority to the director is great from our perspective, when we know the director is really looking for the way to make good projects happen. But it's also an opportunity for increased political meddling, if you will, or for other factors that may not really benefit the transit agencies in the ways that you'd really like to see it happen. So I would just kind of think, as this goes through the process, there's likely to be some kind of questioning about, so what will be the principles that guide that discretion that you're delegating?
good point. And I would argue we've probably done a little bit more of that discretionary stuff than what was within the season.
Right.
Chair, one more question. Well, for this item.
For
For the rest of the meeting. Refresh me on how we got to the 2 million, because we had a lot of discussion on that cutoff point, and is 2 million still the right number? 2 million.
Yeah.
Half or 3, or we stick with?
You guys are looking at me. I think that was I think that number came out of, if you'll recall, we basically took a whole 6-year program and worked through this process with something we had already gone through and funded. So if I recall correctly, and it's been a little while since we did that, I think it just looked like a natural cutoff at the time. But I do think
Natural cutoff.
We can do that.
I think we can, that would be a good exercise for us to do, looking at the last few programs. I think with the argument around inflation and some of the cost drivers in the industry, it's definitely something worthy of looking at.
And that kind of goes back to the chair's point earlier of putting some parameters up front, like COVID and escalation and stuff, because that discretion may be needed just because a project goes to $2.5 million, where before it may have been under the 2 million, unless we see that a natural break is maybe different, which may help some of your 0.2 rate types. I think you will have a continuum. It'll always be gray, but I don't want.
Sure.
So clarification is good if it helps without having unintended consequences. So I appreciate the discussion here.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to move to the second suggestion?
How many are there total, Dan? Are there 7?
7. Okay. And some of them are quicker than others, but there's a couple that'll take some time.
So was this a quick one or?
We thought this was a quick one.
I declare myself that it was only one more question. Thank you for tolerating.
Yeah, no, questions are great here. I mean, the discussion is certainly going to help us. A good approach here. So, okay, number two. So this proposal is to address, I believe, something that Grant brought up in the last meeting of trying to encourage agencies to seek federal discretionary funding. And so the idea here and the recommendation is to add a provision to the CTB policy that would allow for a lower local match rate for projects that do receive federal discretionary funding. So something along the lines of what is spelled out here, that DRPT has the discretion to allow a lower required local match rate or local match for a project that has been awarded federal discretionary funding. The rationale here is there's multiple reasons to approach this. First of all, Virginia, as we saw in the last meeting, has historically received a very small portion of the funds available from the discretionary programs. Additionally, the IIJA has substantially increased the amount of money available. Historically, agencies have been sometimes reluctant to apply for discretionary funding due to the additional administrative requirements that I believe this group talked about last time as well, and the lack of incentives to do so. So lowering the DRPT defined local match requirements to implement these projects provides a clear financial incentive to people to go after them, and incentivizing agencies to do so will also substantially lower the financial burden on the state because it brings in a whole pool of funding. And there are no follow-ups. There actually are a few follow-up slides, but I just wanted to make sure that that is all clear, what the recommendation here is.
And if I can just add one point to this, Dan. On this last bullet point, I think the key here is a federal discretionary grant that's awarded to any transit agency in Virginia is a win for everyone, because that will mean the burden on the state share goes down, and in theory, then that money goes right back into the state program, so more projects can get funded. So this should be a true win-win. At least that's how we've kind of approached it.
Chair?
Mm-hmm.
I really like this because I think we need to incentivize and do more federal money. So two questions. The total match is the same. We would just be lowering the local share because the federal money helps make the total. I just want to see how you're interpreting that. And does the timing work? Because I know I just applied for several federal grants, and it's not for transit, obviously, but, you know, it took so long to get it out of the Congress.
Yeah.
Will a transit operator be penalized because they thought they were going to have federal money, but yet it hasn't?
So to the first question, just I guess a clarification question for you. The total match, are you referring to the total state match rates, or?
Yeah, like up to the 68% or the 50%, but now we're bringing in, and then we've got the local 4% stuff. So I just want to make sure I understand where you're heading with this.
It actually might be good to see the next couple of slides.
Okay. We can mark
That'll help
that one.
that question.
Yep.
Okay.
So these two next slides attempt to illustrate how a lower state match rate could incentivize agencies to go after these federal programs, and how it also can save the state money. We use an example here of a $10 million bus facility project. The first slide here shows the current typical match rates for large urban, small urban, and rural agencies. And the large and small are the same. The only difference is the funding sources that are labeled here, because they have access to different kinds of federal funding. Again, this is a general project. Everybody funds a $10 million project differently. There's often a much wider array of sources coming in to fund that, but this is just an example. So under the current maximum match rate for a major expansion project, large and small urban agencies, rural agencies as well, but we approach those differently, they would often come in asking for up to a 50% match from the state. They would then provide up to 46% from their federal funds to get them to 96%, and then they would be required under the current policy to have a 4% local match. So across those, that would be $4.6 million for the federal program, $5 million from the state, and $400,000 locally. Rural is a little different because we fund those through the 5311 program. When possible, we try to save the state money and use the federal money to fund those. We don't see very many expansion projects in rural jurisdictions. But the typical funding match is quite different. It's 80 federal, 16 state, and 4 local. And so, next slide, please. If we switch this up and allowed for a lower local match, so the example here is 2%. We're not saying that we want to set it in writing at 2%, but this is just an example. For a project that received discretionary funding, this is what we intend, or what we think we'll see as far as match rates go. So the federal programs, bus and bus facilities, as you all know, they offer up to an 80% match, but we've found that the sweet spot is to ask for slightly lower than the max that they offer. So we've set it at 75% here for the urban agencies. And so what that would do with a 2% local match is it would lower the state's participation to 23% if it was awarded. So locally, it goes from a $400,000 commitment down to a $200,000 commitment, which is a savings locally. And really, for the state, it goes from a $5 million commitment down to a $2.3 million commitment. And it allows us to keep the money to then fund other projects. In the rural jurisdictions, there's actually something a little bit odd going in here. And it's because even if we went after a federal discretionary program at 75%, we could also augment that with 5311, which we control. So the savings to the locals would then come to the state. So we would actually be funding this potentially at 18% instead of 16%. So it could go up a little bit to the state, but it's negligible. I mean, it's a $200,000 difference in a $10 million project. And so the idea here is just to illustrate what that could look like, to give you all a little bit more information to respond to here. Questions?
I'm talking between 2 slides to see the difference.
Yeah.
I question how much of an incentive it will truly be to the agencies, because I'm not sure how much of a consideration that local match is into why we're not applying for these federal programs. There's a bunch of considerations that go into that. I think it's nice to have it, but I just question how much of a difference it will actually make to DRPT and that goal to kind of reduce, the state share.
What are the other influences that go into it? I mean, we know the administrative burdens of carrying federal grants.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is, merit is this nice little every year thing that we can apply for, and federal money and new programs, it just tends to come at you in buckets, and you may or may not be ready for it. And we just can't always exist in a state of readiness, not just because of the administrative burden, but because priorities are always shifting. So I think this is great to have, and I like it, but I hope you guys aren't planning on it being this great big change on your end.
So to address that point, it may actually be good to consider the next recommendation at the same time, because it also is with regard to discretionary funding.
And before you get to that, the 2% was used as an example. I think what our recommendation here is to remove the 4% requirement, and then we can go lower potentially. I don't know that we want to, but it gives us some discretion to kind of reduce that 4% down to what makes sense.
Yeah, I think if you reduce the local match piece, you'll have more of an encouragement to go for the federal money, so it'll incentivize it because we want to reduce the impact on our money. But the technical assistance, just like you were doing in engineering, if it is on the federal administration, because I know I'm in a statewide group right now trying to help smaller localities do ARPA funding for localities that have never done federal. And in Virginia, the procurement is pretty tight, so it's not that different than ARPA, but people have panic attacks around federal money. So if we have good systems in place, it may not be that hard, but there is more administrative work. There's no way to get around it.
And one other point on that. So I mentioned in the last meeting that the bus facilities and the low-no programs are currently available now. And so we've been reaching out to some agencies to gauge interest in applying to those programs. We're also pretty confident that DRPT is actually going to put together a group application. And that's something that we haven't done before. But we've heard from a number of agencies that the administrative burden is a serious issue. And so we're trying to, we have, I think, technical expertise on staff here to shoulder a little bit more of that burden. And so even we'll write the grant itself. We'll need to work very closely with the transit agencies who we partner with. But we're pretty confident that that's something that we're at least going to try this round. And if it works, then potentially, get a group or a bundled application moving forward for every time the program's announced.
So there's probably more to discuss on this local match requirement, but I wanted to introduce this too because I think thinking about it holistically is helpful. And so the other recommendation with regard to discretionary funding is to create an annual capital set-aside allocation that can be distributed to projects that are seeking funding through federal programs. So essentially when a discretionary opportunity arises, projects, we can then evaluate them as part of the previous year's merit cycle and actually allocate funds to those, have them available to those to support people going after federal discretionary.
This addresses the
It addresses the timing issue, exactly. And so we know that they're never going to coincide, but what this could do is, if an agency wants to go after one of these programs, they apply for this first, or for that program first, and then it would be a sort of guarantee of state funds to support that project also. So, not quite a guarantee. It's based on scoring, so it would have to go through the evaluation process, of course, but it would allow it.
It would allow us to take it off cycle to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. The pursuit of the federal discretionary money is a priority of the Secretary, and so we're trying to find ways, to your earlier point, to incentivize that. And so and we struggle with the same thing on Smart Scale, the chicken and the egg, what money you have to have in place first. To the extent that we can try to mitigate some of that to make it easier and to incentivize folks to pursue the federal funding, that's what we're trying to do. And we kind of went out on a limb a little bit with Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission and the Bright Transit Group in a project that wasn't ready for merit, but was ready when the federal discretionary program came out. We're like, we'll give you kind of the handshake deal. We've already seen your project. We know what it is. We've worked alongside of you, and we'll make sure we get that, that match available to you when, before that federal discretionary award was made. And so we were able to take that to the CTB in January as part of a program update. And so this isn't, when we say set aside, we've got a CTB member on here too. I want to make sure that this isn't us with a slush fund. It really is allowing us to work outside of our regular merit cycle in concert with the board to put money on a project to help match federal discretionary.
I think that may be a good clarification, is that if you know the system, you know it has to go through CTB and to get approved, but it might be good just to state that. So it's off cycle, but there's an approval process. How much money were you thinking about set aside?
We've gone back and forth on this, but I don't know. I'm going to default to Jen on that one.
I think we've talked a lot with TSDAC about how lumpy our capital program is, and I think if you look at what we did with the program in fiscal 22, that was a year where our the capital needs outpaced the availability of funding. 23, we're in a little bit of a dip, and so we've got the ability to move some things around. So I think it's going to depend, because I don't want, the bread and butter of our capital program is state of good repair. And so I wouldn't want to set aside something that then means Brian or Jamie don't get a bus replacement that they need. So I think we're going to have to try to figure that out and see how these federal discretionary programs roll out to try to determine what the right amount is going to be. We would have to set that amount aside as part of the 6-year program. So it would have to be something that we looked at So it's not something that's in our recommendation for fiscal 23. It would have to be something, if the board policy is changed to allow us to do this, that we would have to incorporate in the fiscal 24 6-year program.
Yeah, and it may need, because that's a good point, you don't want to lock it in and it just sits there, but, when you look at these examples, it's a fair amount of money that you need to match these federal programs. So it may need to have sort of that, and I can't remember the exact wording, but we have the flexibility that you can move between the programs if you need more for SGR or less. Again, you can help me remember what the phrase is, but anyways, somehow build in that it's set aside unless there's a need, scoring or shortfall money or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we could even, I mean, there's many ways we can probably analyze what's coming down the pike for these discretionary grants also in setting a rate for a given year, and also based on that year's merit allocation. If we have a huge state of good repair that need that year, then there likely won't be that much to set aside.
So Al, it might be a good idea to do a tabletop exercise of like a previous capital, 3-year capital project. Put some parameters as far as what if we were able to receive this federal discretionary fund, and what would that impact have been on the state, and see where the dollars fall out at the end of the day, because it may be, if we're getting these federal funds, these discretionary funds, we may actually have more state dollars available than what we're anticipating because of that lower required match.
Yeah.
So I think having that table, so look at the hard numbers, sort of like we did with the operating back in 2018.
We can definitely do that.
Whether it be taking the future 6-year plan and putting some ideas or we think we'll get these in the federal.
Right. Make some assumptions.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to, okay,
If the amount required by, needed by projects to access this discretionary money, if there's so many projects that need it in a given year and you don't have enough set aside, how will you determine which ones get the money?
Then that's where we can,
No, please go.
I was going to say, that's where we can lean back into merit scoring, because we have a prioritization methodology, and this wouldn't exempt anybody from going through that project evaluation.
Yeah, if they were replacing buses, we would review them as SGR. If it was a big expansion facility or something along those lines, we would look at it as a future expansion. And
It's the same competition criteria.
I mean, the growth in the federal program and the federal discretionary program, the bipartisan infrastructure law, is, I think, I can't find the word significant enough to explain how significant it is. I mean, we finally saw apportionment tables this week, and we have to go after that funding, because otherwise, otherwise that's money that should come back to Virginia that's going to go someplace else. So I think Grant showed that in the charts that he presented last week. So we've got to figure out a way to make sure we're getting our slice of the pie back.
And I do appreciate your point about helping write the grant applications, because we do a fair amount of it in City of Falls Church, but when that came out, I'm maxed out. I have ARPA 18 million that I'm working on internally, which is basically a grant writing process, but I got to be able to survive it. I'm going for smart scale, revenue sharing, whatever, and I'm like, and so my counsel's like, are you going to apply for these? Probably not. Well, I'm not going to transit, obviously. I'm encouraging WMATA to do that, but some of these other things don't have the capacity to write another grant. When you administer, at least you could charge most of that against most of the grants, but actually getting it in the door. I think that's a great concept. Not that it's in a CTP policy recommendation, but whatever you're thinking administratively to do.
Yeah, we are very eager to help out with the grant writing. Yeah.
That's one of the questions, sort of looking back to the rural agencies, federal discretionary programs. Would does them accepting or applying for that program trigger them to fall under trying to meet guidelines? So what that where putting like a group application together for DRPT and then there's a subrecipient.
So 5311 recipients are not even allowed to apply to these programs directly. They have to go through DRPT.
Okay.
So that's written in the NOFO.
And if I'm understanding this, we're talking about a significant enough amount of money that even if we have relatively decent success rate, that the amount of state money that's going to be saved and available for reallocation is going to help us address any kind of question about whether we're going to be able to meet the SGR.
Yes, exactly. And I think we can show that with the example. You guys may be able to speak to the numbers right off the top of your head, but the project we just worked with Central Shenandoah on, would have hit our program for close to $700,000, and instead we've got less than $200,000 in it. So that saved the overall merit capital program $500,000. So I mean, that's one. Our track record on discretionary projects that we've applied for ourselves is good. I mean, we've competed for integrated mobility, mobility for all, COVID research and demonstration. Ferry boat, we've done 2 and received those. So basically everything that we've applied for in the last 2 or 3 years and the folks that we've had a heavy involvement in helping have been successful. So some of that is we've got great talent in-house that has experience working on these programs. The other is we have a good technical foundation of prioritization. We can articulate the benefits of our projects using things like the merit and the smart scale prioritization methodology and the data about the projects that other states may not have that kind of firepower behind being able to articulate what their project means. And so I do think we are well positioned to help get these projects in and successful in a discretionary application environment. And for to Brian's question about the rules, not triennial, it doesn't change what happens to us. We get reviewed every 3 years by the feds anyway. So if we can take some of that burden, even off of the small urbans, and do a group application and take that reporting responsibility and that burden on ourselves, we are willing to do that. We're doing that for VDOT on the ferry boat discretionary. They applied through us, and Neil will tell you it's not always easy because the rules are different on the highway side. But so there's a learning curve, but we've got the ability to do that, and I think that's a service that we can provide back to the industry that benefits the overall program, and helps bringing that money to Virginia makes changing a few provisions of the CTV policy to give the board some more flexibility to make that, worth the while of the transit agencies, localities. Definitely something that I think it's definitely something we want to do.
And it sounds like that would help also the concerns you raised, which is enough to actually get people to apply for it.
I think we'll have to see. I think it's a great step, and those two things, these two recommendations together do help a lot.
Okay, ready to move on to
the next one.
One minor one on edit local match requirement. Everything is about capital. The federal's about capital. We just might want to use the word capital in that report.
Very good point.
Yes, thank you. And I guess it's a good time to say also, you all will see a redlined version of the CTV policy also. So you'll be able to review all of the language there. All right. Number 4. This is where we get into our merit scoring. So the recommendation here is to update the asset condition scores to lower the floor for earning points to 80% of the estimated service life for all vehicle types, and it should actually say for all asset types. The rationale here, it's mostly based on vehicle replacements because those take so long to be delivered. But the rationale here is that assets only begin to generate points within that asset condition score at 95% of their estimated service life, which means that if somebody applied to replace an asset that's at 94% of its service life or 10% of its service life, it would receive the same score in the system. And so we usually use that 95 percentage threshold to set our funding threshold. We look at that heavily. And so additionally here, it can take up to 2 years, and in 2022, some estimates are saying up to 3 years to have vehicles delivered, which means that they won't even be taken out of service until 2 or 3 years after they've been evaluated and scored in. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is the current asset condition score schedule where an asset will start to earn points at 95% of its ESL for age and mileage. And the next slide shows what we're proposing here. So what this shows is that any asset that comes in for replacement will start earning points at 80%. So to have, the idea is for just-in-time kind of delivery of assets within this system. This doesn't mean that we're going to fund everything at 80%. We're just proposing this to start stratifying those at a lower percentage point, so it allows them to differentiate themselves from the really young, really low-scoring assets for replacement. And, oh, yeah, there's one more slide here. So this chart is a little difficult to break down, but I'll do my best here, and I'm happy to take questions on it. But this shows the minimum age when a vehicle can be taken out of service, given our current and proposed policies. So I'll direct your attention to the 12-year, 500,000-mile vehicles because those are our big, heavy-duty transit buses. Currently, they do not start earning asset condition points until they are 11.4 years old, which means that under a 2-year delivery time frame, that vehicle wouldn't be taken off the road until it's 13.4 years. Under a 3-year delivery, that's 14.4 years. So that's 2.5 years beyond its estimated service life. If we adopt this proposed policy and we're able to go deeper into the program based on funding levels, the minimum age to earn points for those buses would be 9.6 years, and then if it was a 2-year delivery, it would be able to be taken off the road just before it turns 12. But looking at a 3-year delivery period, it would be 12.5 years old when it's taken off. And so again, the 80% doesn't guarantee that we're going to be able to go that low, but it allows us to stratify those assets and differentiate them from those that really shouldn't be.
30 points remain the same for the 95% threshold. You're just breaking it down for 20 and 25.
One more forward. So, yeah, so yes, I mean, 30 points would be assigned to anything that's at 90 through 100% of its estimated service life. So it expands that category a little bit and changes it.
Gotcha.
If you compare it to the slide before, there was one category that only captured 5%, and so that's why it looks a little different. We smoothed it over and assigned points every 10% here. Questions?
So if I can add something really quick. When we went through, and we'll brief you guys on the outcomes of the fiscal 23 capital process, I think next month. We haven't briefed the full board yet, so we're trying not to get ahead of CTB, but I did share this with the CTB subcommittee last month. That we've been without a statewide bus procurement contract now for almost a year. There's code language, there's budget language, everything is in place for us to be able to reissue those contracts, but we're in essence a year behind in a time period where the industry is struggling to keep up because of supply chain and other issues. So when we looked at merit scores this year, our recommendation to the board is to go deeper into the list than we have historically gone so that we can capture some of these vehicles, because we know it's going to take a while to get the replacements because we've had this procurement issue, and now there's 400 buses in Virginia that need to be replaced before these come online. So we've in essence kind of worked around it this year to implement this type of change. We have the funding level this year to be able to do that. But our funding level, we're riding the crest of a bubble. We'll give you a budget presentation next month as well. I think what we see out in the future, beyond 23, we're going to see those funding levels kind of level back off to where they were. You know, the trend line was going before COVID, and then we went down, and now we've kind of come up, and then things are going to level back out. So we're, in essence, recommending something like this for this particular program, but I do want to say the cautionary note going forward is, and Dan said it several times, so I want to reinforce it, is it gives us the ability to stratify those vehicles so that if we have the funding level to support them, we can go deeper into the list.
So with what you're recommending that piloting this, do you get those vehicles here theoretically at that 12.5 versus 14?
So like the ones that are not quite at 95% that we are recommending this year, I think the industry is we have no contract, and the industry is completely out of whack in terms of delivery timeframes and stuff like that. So those I still don't think are going to be here at 12.5, but I think it's moving us in that direction. It's not allowing them to fall another year behind.
That kind of anticipated my question, which, what happened. It's going to take a pretty big chunk to move to a earlier delivery of these vehicles, isn't it?
Yeah, we're in a different type of backlog right now. And when we sat here in 2018, we talked about the backlog of buses in our asset management system that needed to be replaced. And we talked about that from a funding perspective. It's not a funding perspective right now. It is more of a backlog that's created by, contractual issues and, the industry just having a hard time keeping up. The bigger buses, I don't think it's as bad. Definitely the smaller vehicles, and those are the ones where we're seeing, the biggest delays for those vehicles, 2 or 3 years. And those are 4-year vehicles in many cases, and it's taking much longer to get those replaced than what we have historically seen. But we're competing for chassis and parts with, Amazon and other industries that use the same chassis and frame and basic vehicle to provide their delivery services.
I think this is great. I think the chart you may just want to add what type of vehicles they are, just so people know what they are, the FTA information, just for clarity. But outside of that, I think it helps for those transit agencies that their boards or leadership require that they have the money in hand. Some of us are allowed to just order, hope and a prayer we're going to get the money. But some agencies are not allowed to do that. So I think given that 2% allows them to actually, it's more of a cash flow piece and the state of the vehicle. So I think it's great.
Good. Yeah, I'm just going to add on that piece that Jamie brought up about that. And I would question for those agencies that have to have the money in hand or awarded, would this potentially be putting a hiccup in the process if you're trying to use federal dollars toward the project? So if you're applying for federal dollars and you're showing that the age is 10 years versus 12, would FTA kick that back and say this vehicle's not eligible for replacement? And I raised that because that came up in Lynchburg, where I had funds prior to merit. Funds were being awarded so that we could get them just in time. And FTA kicked it back and said this vehicle's not available for replacement.
Yeah, and I actually made a note because I noticed that as well. The 11.6 there is what I was looking at. So a 12-year vehicle, assume a 2-year delivery. if we will provide the funds at 11.6, to your point, if there's federal funding that's required for that vehicle and it's replacing a 12-year vehicle, then yeah, FTA will say wait until 12 years. I believe that's the case, unless it hit it.
We got around it because the vehicle was like 11 and a half, and we said there's a year-long lead time before the vehicle actually arrives. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Another question, we say all vehicle types, is there merit, and I'm just throwing this out, it's not a recommendation, but is there merit to distinguish between revenue and non-revenue vehicles?
Support vehicles?
Yes, support vehicles.
There could be, I've done an analysis as part of a separate project here, looking at the age of support vehicles when they come in for replacements, and the grand majority of them are far beyond what their FTA rating is. And so, I mean, a lot of those support vehicles are 4-year vehicles, but agencies are running them for 8 years. I mean, they don't have the same requirements to be replaced as a revenue. So not carrying passengers.
So we have, the way the policy was set up originally, they're scored the same in terms of their asset conditions. Where you see them differentiated from the revenue vehicles is when you add those service impact factors. And that's where they do not, because they're not customer facing, they get a lower service impact score. So they tend to have to be older to score pretty high up on that list. So they kind of naturally are prioritized below the revenue vehicles.
Yeah, it's a very good, always on the cusp. They're always support vehicles right there at the limit of where we're funding because there's a few extra points involved.
Yeah, I think the process has been making that distinction for us as opposed to us actually writing it out.
So the other thing I was going to say about the 11.6, if there was an ideal circumstance where someone came in at exactly 11.4 years old, that doesn't even make sense, does it? There may be I think the 11.4 over here should not be 11.4. It might be off. I'm going to go back to this. I don't think that there would be an instance where, it's based on the 9.6. Sorry, thinking out loud here. If somebody came in at exactly 9.6 years to apply, in an ideal circumstance with a 2-year delivery, that's when they'd receive it at 11.6 years. Yeah. But there's going to be rare circumstances where people are going to be exactly at that 9.6, and that it will come in exactly 2 years.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that it's going to be high enough both of those either.
Exactly. The other thing that, usually agencies will order multiple vehicles at once, and if there's one that's slightly older than the other, there's probably ways to see it. But we'll note it and maybe possibly edit it a little bit. Okay. Are we good with number 4? All right. Number 5. This is likely the one that will generate the most discussion here. It's got the most slides, so please bear with me as I kind of walk through this, and then we can break down every aspect of it. All right, the recommendation here is to update the service impact score schedule to include more projects and to provide a higher default score for certain priority project types that have become DRPT priorities. So the default scores would, under this recommendation, pull you all the way up to potentially 40 points instead of up to 32 plus the additional considerations. And I'll get into what that looks like in a moment. And then the second piece of this is to replace the additional considerations with a new scoring category that we're calling incentive scoring. And so there's multiple rationales for each part of this. I'll walk through it and we can go back to each of these. So currently, under the project types, there's only service impacts are assigned to 12 unique merit project type categories that reflect these standard projects that we see. The 12 categories, however, don't offer enough differentiation between certain kinds of project types that fall within those buckets, specifically in the minor enhancements score, where this accounts for 100% of the score, essentially. So that's one rationale. Rationale behind the baseline score changes is that some merit project type categories generate relatively low scores, yet represent a high priority for DRPT and the state. And I'll point out exactly what we're talking about there. Next slide, please. Then the additional considerations, this is, within the service impact score projects, you can receive up to 10 additional points based on those agency-wide performance metrics and those specific characteristics of the project. However, there's multiple issues with the way they currently work. The first is that the current weighting of those additional points has proven to make very little difference in funding decisions. It's really just right around the edges, of course. One additional point offers very little incentive for an agency to pursue a certain kind of project because of the additional consideration. Additionally, the considerations are not always in line with statewide goals, and the agency performance or agency-wide performance metrics have been difficult to verify because we don't collect them outside of this process. And a lot of agencies aren't required to report some of these to NTD. So, I think, I'm going to walk through this, and then we'll pause and talk about all of this, okay? So this is the current service impact score schedule with the 12 types that we just reviewed a moment ago, where you have the high impact, you receive 3 points, medium 5, low 2. The maximum that you get as a default here is 32, and the minimum that the project would get as a default is 8. And then those additional considerations could bump a project up to a maximum of 40. Under the proposal, which is on the next slide, we are adding a few categories and then stratifying them differently. And so I'll present it first organized by category so you can see the new project types, and then we'll flip to the next slide, which has them in scoring order. So the idea here, so we leave it here for now, looking at the categories, is to split up 2 of the existing categories to allow for more differentiation within those, and to add 1 new category that we haven't seen before. So within the admin maintenance facility category, currently any project that is impacting an administrative or a maintenance facility receives the same score. So that could be something that really improves the operations of that facility, or it could be lighting in that facility. And so it doesn't really allow for us to differentiate between the impacts of those different kinds of projects. And so here, the idea is to split this into projects that support operations versus facility projects that are non-operational in nature. And you can see that they score significantly differently in the program. Similarly, in the maintenance equipment and parts, we currently have 1 category for maintenance equipment and parts for anything that a transit agency operates. And what this proposal does is split it out into vehicle and vehicle support equipment versus property and facilities. And the property and facilities could also read non-vehicle support equipment. And so this could be, maintenance equipment and parts for facilities, for other infrastructure that the agency operates and owns. And then the final piece here is to add a new category for financial tools and include all. And this is a new category because we've found some people coming in applying annually for certain financial tools like capital costs of contracting and debt service that was previously approved, or for previously approved replacements of assets that don't quite fit into the categories as defined. And so we're creating a new one for those types of projects under this proposal. So if you flip to the next slide, it'll just show you the order. Vehicles score the highest. Financial tools, which are necessary really to continue the operations of an agency or to continue with kind of a previously approved financial approach to funding a project, those would be funded highly as well, and then scaled down from there. So the idea here is that the full 40 points are available through the default scores, and then the incentive points are in addition to that for up to 10. And so I think we can pause here and review this. This is a lot, I know. And so we can track back to the beginning of it, but I felt like I should present it all before we get into the nitty-gritty here.
I have some comments on the customer facilities, bus stops, and shelter improvement.
Okay.
So we've got 2 scores that were raised here. And then in the following slides, you also add some additional, 5 points for it being this type of project, basically. And it feels like you are double dipping to push this up. And I get why. I know it's a priority, but it makes me nervous because without a commitment to operating assistance to clean all this new infrastructure, it scares me, because as soon as there's money out there for us to go after and it's competitive, we get prodded to go after it, and we get all this money and we have to deliver it, and then we're getting all the calls, why isn't this clean? And we've got to pass on those costs to our funding partners, and it might be $2,000 a year per shelter or trash can, and it adds up. So it makes me nervous, and I just also don't like the double dipping in the points. Like, if you're going to add points for priorities, add points for priorities on that end. Don't kind of fake the actual impacts here. Like, is it really a high impact to safety and security to put a shelter in? Or, I question that. Landing pads, okay, there's a safety component there, but is it high impact? And, operating efficiency, that was low impact before, and that one was kind of like, to me. Frequency, travel time, and or reliability, like, how does that change it at all? So I kind of question where those individual things are coming from. I know initially you said you guys worked with a consultant to kind of develop these, but the ones that are revised here or added on for the new categories, where are those coming from?
All good points. So where they're coming from is it was a way to prioritize them more in here, but we felt we could justify an increase to safety and security based on increases in lighting and pedestrian access and things along those lines. As far as the frequency, travel time, and reliability, it's a fine point that you made, that it may not have a direct impact on that, but if you have better facilities that guide people towards using the system better, it could have an impact on things like that. But all valid.
And just quick piggybacking on Sam's comment though, because usually when we do a shelter, we just do the shelter pad, et cetera. When we talk about lighting, we talk about solar lighting too. That's just not enough. So I agree with Sam about the impact. If I can get the minion to do a pole with a light, then I'm winning. But if not, it's not helping. It's a lot.
Would it be helpful to go to the incentive points so everybody's on the same page about some of the other points that Sam and Jamie were making?
I see.
Yeah, okay. So if you want to bump to the next slide. So this is the current schedule for earning those additional consideration points. Just put it here for reference. The next slide is our new paradigm here. So this would be in addition to the 40 points that are available for service impact, up to 10 points within each of these categories. And these categories are more aligned with DRPT priorities right now. What the idea here is that if a project satisfies one of the characteristics going down the right side of this chart, it will receive a full 5 points for that category with a cap of 10 points. So if there was a project that an agency was pursuing that included zero emissions vehicles, it would receive 5 points. If it included zero emissions infrastructure, 5 points as well. If it included both, also 5 points. Same thing goes for the 5 innovation categories and the 3 safety and comfort around customer facilities, which is what Sam was referring to in the last comment. And so the last category here is a bit different in character, agency accountability and kind of satisfying various statewide requirements for asset management reporting, for completing strategic planning requirements, state capital planning requirements, and performance reporting. So this is kind of rewarding good behavior and kind of following the DRPT guidance on all of these various touch points that we have throughout the year to collect data. And so it's a new approach that the idea with the 5 points is to increase the incentive for pursuing projects that include these characteristics, to really kind of elevate that in the process.
What percentage of agencies would hit that agency accountability 5 points?
We've never run an analysis to do that, but a decent number would.
I would be interested in kind of knowing the number of winners versus of that.
And what categories they're in versus like small, urban, and rural, because when I look at this, I see like 4 agencies, and I think
I'm sorry, what was the last?
4 agencies that would probably do some of these enhancements, so. I don't know. No, keep going.
Okay. Well, so I think that's the extent of what I was going to present on this category, but I know that this one's a lot, and this is kind of rethinking the way that we approach this service impact score to elevate it on the SGR side of things. So right now it's a 60-40 split between asset condition score, 60%, 40 points, 40% from service impact. This would elevate the service impact and the incentives to 50 points, raising that to 110 total. So it raises the percentage a bit of how service impact would influence the score of those projects. But it also addresses all of those kinds of issues that we found within the specific project type assignment. And if you roll back 2 slides, please. Sam, you also pointed out something that I overlooked, is that yes, the customer facilities for bus stops and shelter improvements, we did bump up in a couple of categories here. This has been a consistent DRPT priority to implement, but it always scores on the cusp of not getting funded. And so as a way to incentivize that, we elevated it in categories that we felt we could justify from a service impact point of view.
Have you talked to the agencies and asked, is the issue with stop improvements funding, or is it something else? Because personally, I think it's not that hard to find shelter money, bench money. Politicians love to cut a ribbon, and that's a pretty cheap ribbon to get to cut. What's that?
It's okay.
Well, it's great. We provide this wonderful amenity to our passengers, and everyone supports that, But there's these other issues that kind of get to that. You don't necessarily want to put something at every stop, because some stops have 0 riders or 1 rider a day, and it's just there for community access but isn't really utilized. Sometimes there's a lot of issues with getting the right-of-way to put something there, or working with our friends over at VDOT to get something in, even when there is right-of-way there. And there's just, back to administrative hurdles, I don't necessarily know that the funding is the issue, but I would be interested, have you heard that the funding is the issue?
So we engaged our agencies during this, the current study that we're doing, the E&M study, the Equity and Modernization Study. We've heard various kinds of obstacles to pursuing this, including, working with VDOT and getting right-of-way considerations. The thing that DRPT can control is opening up funding paths for people, and so that's what we're trying to impact here with this. But yeah, we do realize that is not the only barrier.
So one point on just like the permitting process for state-owned right-of-ways, locally owned right-of-ways is a totally, I think, similar issue, but doesn't go through the VDOT process. So Jen mentioned earlier that we have a new engineering manager on staff, and one of his first projects that he's working on, he's former VDOT, he is documenting the process for if a transit agency wants to install a shelter on state-owned right-of-way, what does that look like? What are all the steps? He sent me his observations thus far. He's talked to a lot of folks. It is insane. There are like 10 different obstacles that you got to get through just to get a permit, and then you got to get it renewed every single year. It's crazy. So we're currently working on a way to streamline that process. So I just didn't want you to think that, we're just looking at the funding part. I think funding, I understand what you're saying. There's definitely funding out there for bus shelters. I mean, the NPO provide, TAP funding, and bus shelters are certainly eligible for that program. Is Smart Scale. We see a lot of bus shelters funded through the Smart Scale program. So the funding is out there, but I think we're trying to tackle both permitting and hopefully incentivize more bus shelters through DRPT funding.
Yeah, and the concern is just if you're elevating that as a priority in the funding, by default, there's only but so much pie to go around. What's suffering?
Yeah.
Just touch base on the right-of-way piece too. Hopefully localities don't have conflicts with that, but one of the things we find is we tend to use federal money for right-of-way acquisition. And if we're gonna add federal money in, federalizing right-of-way is a whole nother discussion in terms of estimates and paying for it, unless they gift it. So I appreciate looking at the process, and feel free to include us localities. Fix VDOT first, because I use VDOT money, I have the same issue. I'm trying to crosswalk the changes on the service impact. So it would help me to have a little bit more understanding, like operating efficiency went away, but it looks like it's zero emissions, but lead got disappeared, and lead on a facility seems kind of important. So thinking behind that. Safety and comfort seems to be picking up some of the accessibility. Yeah, anyway, I'm trying to like cross-check and understand your rationale for the change. And in particular, we had a whole lot of discussion around service frequency, travel time, and reliability, trying to have a proxy to capture that information, and that is a significant change that I see here. So I just wanted to understand more thinking behind it.
Certainly, and so those 4 categories still do exist in the service impact score. It's just not in the additional considerations. Exactly. So because we've changed them to incentive points, we broke away from the 4 categories in that scoring category, and so in order to concentrate more on what we have determined to be our agency-wide kind of goals and objectives. And so zero emissions vehicles remain because the majority of vehicle projects fall into the SGR and minor enhancement programs where this would impact it. LEED, we found that nobody really ever received LEED scores because in the SGR and minor enhancement categories, we hardly ever funded anything that would change a building to become LEED. There are renovations to a building or small things to a facility that it could be a LEED facility originally, but we wouldn't necessarily reward that facility for installing, lights or other fixtures that wouldn't contribute to the efficiency of that building. And so that was the thinking behind taking that out of the incentive because we haven't really utilized it. And I think you had one other question that I didn't note here about the frequency, travel time, and reliability. The key with that is that it's still reflected in the service impact score. Did I address all of the concerns there?
Yeah, clarifying what's still in the, going back to the default chart.
Yeah.
Those scores, that was helpful because in the way it was worded before, I was seeing them as a replacement versus picking it up on the additional consideration.
Right. Yeah, the additional considerations earlier, in the current version, really do track with those 4 categories. And these incentives don't necessarily track with those.
I think another thing that I thought either I zoned out or you didn't mention it, but the allocation for high impact medium both change. Now 10 points for high impact versus 8.
And it's because, so in the current policy, the default scores only would range up to 32, whereas we're proposing here that it ranges all the way up to 40.
Yeah, I think that's where it's also going to capture the points that are
Oh, exactly.
Good thing.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. Yes, there's a lot of changes to process at once, and I realize that. But we figured we'd approach it holistically and, look at all of the individual aspects. Yes.
One question on financial tools that I'm rephrasing to make sure I understood what you're saying. The financial tools category is more for like financial strategy as opposed to like a computer that an accounting tech.
Yes, thank you.
And I would recommend replacing tools with something else because I can see someone coming in and arguing, I'm going to use this computer for my accounting technician who's doing payroll. grants management. So,
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you were also talking about debt, just the financial funding plan.
It's a funding plan, exactly. And so, yeah, the things that are all, yeah, it is not a computer or a calculator.
Yeah.
That is a great,
Software.
or something.
yeah. So I think if you use like strategy or some other term as a business tool that might delineate it, it avoids arguments down the road.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
So I'm definitely still absorbing this, so I'm glad it's still on the work plan. I look back at the strategic or work plan just to make sure, I'm not sure it's a wrap up. I may need more than a wrap up.
Okay, fine.
On this one. But I feel like we need to delve into Sam's points of what's high, low, and understand that a little bit. But the one thing that we talked about last time, and it's important to a lot of us, I know I peeing on it, is the accessibility. So accessibility is still in service impact scoring. But when we go to the additional consideration, is there, I was trying to cross-reference it, is it the same or different? So like, do you give extra points for the same thing, or does it incentivize something new?
So,
There's enhancements for pedestrians, accessibility, connecting passengers to transit.
yeah, so there's some kind of repeating of themes in there. It's not organized behind the accessibility factor area or criteria area. It's rather in the safety and comfort around customer facilities. But so a lot of the same concepts are reflected in here. They're just kind of reorganized and reprioritized with this new scoring scheme.
And the first three, you just need to hit one of the components, but for agency accountability, you have to do it.
Yes, all four, yes, exactly.
Any other questions, comments on this point?
One other question based on the discussion we had last time on vehicles. I just attended the NVPA's annual innovation conference. They were having a lot of conversation about vehicles and whether they're EVs or hybrid and batteries. So I can't speak to it in particular, but I was wondering from the operators, is zero emissions technology too narrow in order to get extra points?
Definitely narrower than some of the like federal funding opportunities, which are low or no. But I think if that's the direction that the state wants to push this, then that makes sense to have it be zero. Because that seems to be where the federal money is heading towards. You know?
Yeah, I think making it low emission as opposed to zero emission would capture CNG vehicles, which are eligible under the Low-No program. But hybrid vehicles, I know our transit agencies have had a very difficult time maintaining hybrid vehicles. I think they've presented a number of maintenance challenges, so I don't think this group would want to entertain including those as a good practice.
No. 75% of the fleet is hybrid.
Yeah.
Thank you, because that's technically one I could speak to, although I'm starting to learn, because now council wants us to change our fleet over, and our maintenance bay for regular vehicles can't handle hybrids. So I have a feeling I'm about to learn more about that. But yes, I was interested in your perspective on that. Thanks. I do like the point changes and more points. It seems like if you're going to go for it, it has more value.
Certainly going to have more of an impact, getting the 5 points as opposed to just one individually.
Have we done any kind of analysis to see how previous projects would kind of grade out under a new formula? I know that there's a lot to that, and that would be a very heavy piece of work, but anything like back of the envelope wise to kind of verify that this is having the intended effect, or would have the intended effect?
So we haven't analyzed an entire SIP or an entire program for 1 year that way. There's difficulties in doing that, of course, because as you change things around, your funding considerations change around. It is a difficult task to do. But the way that at least I understand the minor enhancement programs to work, as these points shift, that's what dictates our funding decisions. And so it's pretty much saying that if you score higher on this list, you will likely get funded. Now, how the additional points the incentive points rather, would kind of pan out, that would be a more difficult involved. We'd have to rescore things. But yeah. So
you could run like, you know, one project through this new scoring, but you really see the impact you'd have to take care of.
Yeah, do all of it.
A lot of that, and that would be a lot of work.
You want to see what gets funded under a new paradigm, but, you know, if one expensive project bumps up into the funding threshold, then it could completely change everything below.
Yeah.
And so it's very difficult to say what would have been funded or not. You could show what has scored well and what wouldn't score well, but because everything is set based on funding, it is a difficult task.
Chair, I am wondering if this is possible. I'm looking at, sorry, my slide numbers are different because I didn't have the merged version. The updated service impact, current score schedule, and then the proposed. The red on proposed tells us what's the new category, so I'm having trouble cross-referencing the high, low, medium impact. Could we do track changes? I don't know how hard it's going to be to read, but if we were to look at customer facilities, transit stations, that have changed. But I was trying to pick one that changed. If we track change out medium and insert the new one, just so I could see what changed.
Yeah, we can. So I think there's actually one extra axis in one of these, but so. Because there's a lot of changes, it is difficult to track.
Yeah.
The admin maintenance facilities and the maintenance equipment and parts, the reason why it's difficult to track is because that's splitting out one project type into two. And so if my indications on here are correct, and I'd have to go back and review this just to make sure, is that the higher scoring of the administrative and maintenance facilities, the ones that support operations, should track with the high, medium, and lows of the previous administrative and maintenance facilities all. And is that correct? So let's see here. Medium, medium, low, medium. Oh, we bumped it to high. Right, okay. So, yeah, we can, for the next time, we can bring you something that tracks all of those in a clearer format if you'd like. Because then the other one, it's low across the board except for medium on safety and security.
And the coloring right now is to delineate high, medium, low, but it's making it harder for me to cross-reference what changed. But, I mean, obviously, non-operation, if that's all new, then everything.
That whole thing
is
gone there.
But did it change in any of the other categories where I was trying to?
The only category that's not one of the new, like the red indicated categories, the only one that should have changed is this customer facilities, bus stops, and shelter improvements. Right, yeah, so under the original, it was, and this is to Sam's point a moment ago, under the original, it was low, no, high, medium, and under the new, it is low, high, high. But yes, I appreciate that this is difficult to track.
I mean, we could even send you the changes in bullet form.
Yeah.
It's like all the changes that we made to this. I mean, showing it visually might just be even more complicated in table format. It might just be better, like in bullet format. These are all the changes.
We can certainly work on that.
And maybe before the next packet, because I know that it takes a while to get the packet together, but if you have something that's pretty easy to generate, or you did it as part of preparing this and you just ship it out, then we could doodle it more.
Yeah. Maybe when we send out the meeting summary,
Yeah.
and send you some additional materials with that.
Okay. Lots of good comments.
I'll have to do the same for the additional considerations, but it's not as big and not as complex.
Yeah, and the additional considerations, we can highlight the kind of what we included before and what's included in the new. So you can see what's tracked, because there's more new than there is old coming over, yeah.
Which things stay snapped up. Yeah, thank you.
Ready to?
Number 6, then?
Thank you all for those comments. Much appreciated. All right, so 6 and 7 here are changes to the major expansion scoring. Number 6 is relatively easy. I think 7 might generate more of a conversation here. But the recommendation under 6 is to update the descriptions of the major accessibility measures to address some methodological considerations, but also to provide us with some greater flexibility in defining the actual metrics that we look at. So the rationale here, and there's 2 areas where we are proposing changes. One is under the non-work destinations provision. So currently, non-work destinations capture locations that are not directly associated with access to jobs, and it includes things like workforce development, healthcare, public services, parks, kind of, public features. The issue, however, is that the non-work data source that we've used is limited and it's not regularly updated, and almost all major construction projects have maxed out the 3 points that are available in this area to impact their score, so it's not actually leading to any differentiation between projects. Under the disadvantaged populations, the CTB policy currently narrowly defines disadvantaged populations in the methodology as low income, minority, and limited English proficiency. However, these groups do not fully capture transit-dependent populations. Groups like zero-card households, disabilities, seniors, etc. And so, next slide, please. The recommendation here is to simply strike some language from what we spell out in the CTB policy to allow for some more flexibility here. So under the first one, we are proposing doing away with measuring access to workforce development and non-work destinations, primarily because it doesn't lead to any differentiation in the scoring. And the second piece here is also to strike the definition of disadvantaged populations to allow us the flexibility to include others that we have determined to be kind of populations of interest here. And that is all I have on number 6.
Dan, is it fair to say on the first one that in terms of data for the analysis, it's hard to come by
Yes.
data sets around particularly non-work destinations?
Yeah, that's true. We do not have a statewide data set on this, and so what we've had to do is seek publicly accessible data on this when we've had to review non-work destinations in various areas around the state. The majority of projects that we've evaluated have been in Northern Virginia, and we have good data up there. But the rest of the state, it is a little bit more difficult to gather that correct data.
And with disadvantaged population, again, we have a more robust data set now to measure disadvantaged populations than we did with this definition. With some of the work that's been done with V-Trans, there's also, there's data sets on zero-car households. So we basically have a more robust data set than what this definition limits us to. So I just think it's important to differentiate. It's not just giving us flexibility. In one case, we have an issue where we can't get consistent data. In the other situation, we have much more robust data than what is defined in the measure. And so we want the ability to pivot and use the tools that we have available to us.
Thank you for that clarification.
Maybe I missed something in this, but the description of the economic development seems, what you're talking about is increasing the category to include places for social services, place, parks and recreation, and so forth. But the economic development description is pretty much focused on places of employment as opposed to other forms of economic development. I'm thinking like retail, accessibility to shopping, accessibility to restaurants, tourism destinations, things of that nature. Isn't that a component of what you're trying to achieve through economic development, incorporation of public transit?
So just to be clear here, we are not proposing any changes to the definition of the measure or the metrics in the economic development category. It's all within the accessibility category.
Oh, okay.
So within the accessibility category, we look at access to jobs, which also includes this access to non-work destinations, and we look at the ability of disadvantaged populations to access the improvements.
All right.
And so to what you were speaking about, I mean, that we would need a very robust data set to analyze all kinds of non-work destinations that we simply do not have on a statewide basis. Beyond that, a lot of these major expansion projects have impacts that are system-wide, and so if it is providing some sort of system-wide improvement, all of the non-work destinations that are accessible by that system would benefit from that improvement. And so it really maxes out the scores that are available and provides for no differentiation between one project and another. And so what we're trying to convey here is that the kind of complexity of that and the limited data available means that measure isn't really making any big difference in scoring.
I'll say for accessibility for disadvantaged populations, I do not agree with striking that language. You're going to start getting into what I feel like is the everybody syndrome, where everybody is disadvantaged, as opposed to the Title VI populations that we're clearly required to follow for federal and state rules. So we do have paratransit service, which obviously is a costly service that meets some of those needs when you're talking about elderly and disabled, but I don't think it's a good idea to fool the disadvantaged populations that we're required to follow today just because we have access to more data. So, for example, if you're looking at populations for and it may depend on each transit agency, but if you can afford to live in a living facility, there's two things. Either you've got money to be able to do that and family support, or the alternative is you can't leave anyway because you may not have the income to do that, and having transit is not going to help you do that. So I think being very careful about the unintended consequences, because what happens, in my opinion, when you take out, for example, zero-car households, now in Richmond, you can choose to not have a car because you can ride public transit, but you're rich. And so I think just being very careful if you want to refine it, but taking it out will allow, I'll just say me. It won't be me, but me. It will allow me to identify populations that are disadvantaged on paper to get my project built in more points. So the whole, point of having low-income minority and LEP populations is because it's systematically disadvantaged populations. Like, it's not, So you may have data that may support the project, but again, the criteria that you mentioned for populations that may come out of those 9 groups, seniors, those with disabilities, their travel patterns are different, and you may start giving points, just like, in some cases, developers make it work and try to find whatever points they can. I think that will be the unintended consequence of this. I think leave it with what the federal government is requiring, and if you want to beef up both project structure or application to you, that's one thing to include that information, but I don't think you're going to get the benefit for including certain populations because I just don't, I think you're gonna start getting down to the, now who else is disadvantaged today? And that's not the intent of Title VI. You've got other titles that deal with other populations, and if you want to include that as a concept, I'm okay with that. But I don't think we should remove what we're required to follow as trans today.
Thank you for that. Just to be clear on one point here, that whatever is decided as the methodological approach to analyzing population groups, it'll be the same across each project. So it's not that each would come in and make the claim that, oh, we're addressing this population, so we should get credit for it. This is just in creating flexibility for us to define either a broader or a narrower group. And so your comment is completely valid and completely, well received. I just wanted to just clarify that it's not about them making the argument to us, it's about us setting a methodology.
Right, but it goes back to, I think, the politics that we discussed earlier. Like, if I have a project that is important to us as an agency, I'm submitting it to you, I already know what's going to get me those points because I've looked at the landscape. And so y'all are using your data in your data set, but again, are you meeting the needs of those traditionally underserved populations or disadvantaged populations? I think you may get away from that. And it's, I think the whole purpose in identifying those specific populations is to address systematic issues. I think when you spread it out, it's, a lot better. So, just my thoughts.
Yeah.
No, it's great, thank you.
And just to now understanding better the context in which we're dealing with this, I do wonder about the question of food deserts and whether that is something that should be addressed.
So food deserts are certainly something that transit can address. I think what we would struggle with that is a similar issue to what we're having with non-work destinations, is that I don't personally know of a statewide data set that is consistent on food deserts. And so if we're comparing projects to each other across the state, we need to use some sort of matching data. We can certainly look into it, but like I said, nothing. I'm not aware of it off the top of my head.
Okay, any other points on item number 6?
Yes, for me. I think part of it was, it shows up on there better, but the light and dark gray to white was making it hard to split between the accessibility. I think the economic development can pick up, Chair, the things you were talking about for the non-work destinations, because local economic development activity should be more than jobs, right? It's everything you described. Although maybe it needs to be expanded a little. But under accessibility, I always had trouble with putting jobs there. I want only jobs, because I want people to be able to get to their job, but I want them to get to the medical appointment, those other accessibility things. And the disadvantaged populations, I always thought was too narrow. Not that it should be as wide as, Jamie, you were talking about, but it shows Title VI here, but it doesn't show ADA, for example. It was like we picked two things that we could, based on data versus what the outcome is going to be. So I'm still struggling with, yes, we probably need to edit it, but what is the edit?
Yeah. The edit could be to expand it slightly. It could be to edit it. It could be whatever this kind of, this group kind of recommends here. So.
What would happen, let's say accessibility went into 4 categories? I'm just picking that because it's easy to do 25% each instead of 33 and something. Could we pick up some of the things we've talked about or at least mentioned and score it? Because a part of it is we have the outcome, we know what the intent is, but you all have to feel like you have a way to somewhat quantitative.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's so many aspects of accessibility that can be addressed by, enhanced transit services and facilities. I think in the end of the day, what limits us with this category is the availability of consistent data across the state that will allow us to compare projects kind of apples to apples. And so certain jurisdictions produce excellent data on hundreds of metrics that can be used in this category. Others produce just what they need to, or we just have access to population data from the census. And so whatever we do here, we just need to keep that in mind, that we want to be able to compare projects across the board, and to do that, you need to have some sort of consistency.
So under our earlier discussion, we're tracking accessibility. So do you have any data for that, or is it all qualitative that we've determined it's high impact and enhancements for pedestrian accessibility is there?
In the service impact score?
Yeah.
Yeah, in there it's a qualitative measure of what kind of the nature of that project
Here
would
we're trying to get it quantitative.
quantitatively, exactly.
Maybe we can't. I don't know.
So the way that we are currently doing access to jobs and disadvantaged populations within walking distance, there's been no issues with the way that we calculated those. It's literally just those subsets of data that we're having trouble with from a data perspective. Right, so yeah, we're not proposing getting rid of these two accessibility measures. They're good measures, and we have good data on it. We were just proposing changing them. But I don't know. Other thoughts?
I'll just throw out an ad, sort of bouncing off of and Jamie both brought up. I see Jamie's point in wanting to still emphasize the Title VI piece.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's not an ability, like to do what Cindy was saying, of like add a third category if we want to include those zero-car households, seniors, individuals with disabilities, and just have it a lower percentage ranking. So maybe it's 40, 40, 20. Because there is merit to encouraging people to not have a car in more congested, large urban areas. So, I mean, I'll just throw that out for thought, food for thought.
So another concern that I have on that point too, so for the ADA item, or accessibility for, I can't remember the title, I believe, but if we are looking at accessibility as far as those with disabilities, we're giving points to a project where the infrastructure probably doesn't match. That's a concern that I have too. And so you're saying, hey, on this type of project, I'm going to give you more points so you can build something. But then the city sidewalks don't facilitate any assistance with the disability portion and allowing them to be able to access that system. So for me, if you're going to award those points, I'm fine with that. If you have a plan that is submitted to DRPT to say, is that location or is that project even accessible anyway? Because if not, you're giving points for a project where half of the places, maybe even in downtown Richmond, may not have that. Well, I know we're better than it, but, that don't have that accessibility. Another piece that I continue to have a concern with zero-car households and projects and kind of what is occurring with, I'll just say minority populations and low-income populations. You're being pushed out, so you don't have that density, but your job is downtown. Even in Fredericksburg, nobody can afford to live in Fredericksburg. Like, it's $350,000 for a little house. But if we do it on how we've done traditionally transit-funded projects, those downtown core areas, which now have rich people, you're addressing it with the jobs portion, but I still want to make sure that when we're looking at disadvantaged populations, that we still consider that those folks that typically live in more dense urban areas cannot afford to live there anymore. And then what the zero-car household means is starting to change too, because now those folks who are economically disadvantaged now have to have a car because they can't afford to live downtown, so they don't have a choice. So I know I get it, but I'm on the ADA piece, I'm just concerned about if you're going to have a project that you're going to fund, it needs to be able to show that it has the infrastructure, or you're putting infrastructure in place to help those folks with disabilities. Because in many cases, I can say we in general are probably not outside of like curb cuts, like great, that's not helping if the sidewalk sucks. So again, I don't have any total issue with adding it, but I don't think we're trying to further the needle for disabled populations through this effort if we don't include what that project is to resolve the issue.
The locality is going to be at risk of not having an accessible route. Department of Justice certainly has a voice in that. But I think it's a good point is, are we looking at just the bus stop, or are we looking at the accessible route to the bus stop when you're scoring it?
Okay.
Which is a tall order for y'all, so I'm not saying we need to like do all that, but I mean, do maybe even if it's an element of that, because it is a tall order, but you know, for us, you know, even DOJ, like how many complaints do they get for people that, you know, put a project in, and unless it doesn't have impact around the bus stop, they're just like, you're right, wait for the paperwork. So that didn't help you, but good luck.
No. This all is helpful. Don't worry.
Well, I think when we look at all of the factors, the land use and economic development can pick up some of the things. So like right now, I'm not feeling like a change anywhere. I'm just struggling with accessibility still.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a 40-40-20, something like that. But
I mean, there is always the option to leave it as it stands, which captures some of these items that we've talked about as well. So,
Yeah, and I think the reason why we even brought this forward as a potential policy change is because we have the data, so we can use it pretty easily for disadvantaged populations, and it would also be consistent with V-Trans and some of these other statewide initiatives. So
I don't think I have a problem removing workforce development and non-work destinations, because you can pick that up in economic development, and it should be looked at holistic anyway, and it is a harder one to track. I think I agree with Jamie after this discussion to not remove the Title VI definition there. So where I'm still struggling is if we did some elderly disabled component, you would pick up medical and non-work destination and a broader accessibility issue. Jobs for me was always hard to have, and accessibility was more like a proxy, because you got economic development, you got land use, and now we got another one with jobs. But jobs help address low income, minority, Title VI population access. But if we're not doing affordable housing under economic development, we're just not going to solve the issues Jamie talked about.
So I think what I'm hearing is that you want us to rethink this a little bit and come back possibly with another slightly edited suggestion that addresses these issues.
Yeah, and ultimately too, to your point, if we're including ADA, just what are we trying to solve?
Right.
Because I'm not sure I'm hearing exactly what we're solving if you're adding an ADA component. Because, you know, is there an issue, and what are we trying to solve, and are we solving it through this? I'm not sure this is the tool to solve it. Now, knowing that we've got passengers with disabilities, I still don't, again, I would just evaluate what we're trying to solve through this particular source. Yeah.
Okay.
And to that point, you know, we are doing major expansions, so if you're doing capital, there's going to be other laws that come in that are automatically going to make it accessible.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to issue you a building permit on a non-accessible building, so.
That's right. Yeah, the new piece is going to be accessible, but not necessarily all of the other pieces of your infrastructure that are still in place. All right.
When it does a budget.
We're ready to move on.
So we'll have a chance to think about this
Yeah,
over the course of the next
discussion
month.
was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Good, all right, so we have reached the last recommendation. And this one is to remove the smart scale area-based factor weights from the major expansion scoring methodology. Instead here, what we are proposing is that all factor areas will be equally weighed regardless of the geographic location. The rationale behind this is that the smart scale geographic weighting is a very effective way to even the playing field between hundreds of projects in a given year within the smart scale program. However, the merit major expansion category within this program really only provides funding to a maximum of 4 projects each year from what we've seen. It's a much smaller pool. And taking that into account, staff and consultants have done some sensitivity testing here and found that the impacts of that weighting to be negligible. And in some circumstances even to be a little bit counterintuitive. And so the idea here, and you can flip to the next slide, is to just not use this geographic weighting in the major expansion program anymore.
So just to reiterate probably the obvious, we would still keep the 6 categories that we just spent a good discussion on.
Yes.
Because they're required by code.
Yes. And they're important because of the outcomes we're trying to achieve, but we're not waiting.
Exactly. And so a little bit more context here. I just had in my notes here. These are, again, this is the illustration of those 4 categories. We've evaluated 12 projects over the last 4 years through the Merit Major Expansion Program. 11 of those projects have been located in Category A areas, which is Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia and Fredericksburg. 10 of those 11 were in Northern Virginia, and 1 project was in an Area C area, which is Blacksburg. We've seen no projects come in areas B and D. And so what we found with this program is that really it's major urban areas that are coming in to apply for these funds. But taking that into account, we did some sensitivity testing what projects would score in different areas, and found that an equal weighting provides for probably the most consistent across the board.
Can we see that analysis?
Yes, I don't have it in this presentation, but yeah, I can share that.
Because I think it's one of the things, even when you started the presentation at the beginning and we were trying to decide, high impact, low impact, I just wanted to see projects so I could say, oh, am I losing or am I winning as a transit agency? So if you've done any sensitivity tests for any projects, whether it's, for this element or for impacts or what have you, anything that we can see. And of course, I know sometimes that gets into, oh, well, I lost, so what can I do to win? But I think for this particular group, since we're, looking at helping or assisting or providing feedback on policy, we really need to understand what the projects were so we can understand the context of what that looks like. Because I have no idea what Fredericksburg area did for this, no idea.
Yeah, Fredericksburg, we have not seen any major expansion projects.
Why did you just said our area?
So because you're in the Category A, we had 11 projects total, but they've all been, none of them were in the Fredericksburg area.
Oh, good. That's that. I don't think I did that.
Sorry, it was Arlington, Alexandria, Hampton Roads. Really just those 3.
So none in B and D.
None in B, so none in the rural areas and none in the purple areas. Thus far.
So if you look back programmatically, Dan can correct me, we had 4 major projects associated with that were projects that had long been in the pipeline, but were located adjacent to the Amazon HQ2. So it's, metro, second entrance to Crystal City Metro Station. It's 2 extensions of the Crystal City Potomac Yard Transitway, one in Arlington, one in Alexandria, and then a second entrance to the Potomac Yard Metro Station, which is under construction. So those were, I think, the first round we had those, and they were all very big, very well-developed projects with leveraged funding. So those went through the first year. I think we had the HRT mobile ticketing app. That was the one that doesn't fit with the rest of them that we've ran through major. This year we evaluated 2 VRE projects, the Crystal City Station relocation for VRE and a train set. Yes, train set. And those were just very small funding of a very large project that just needed a little bit of state match to kind of bring their funding package together. We evaluated, what else?
Blacksburg, their facility.
Their admin
facility. VRE, we did the LU facility, though I forget exactly what that stands for.
Life cycle overhaul, something.
LOU, you would think I would remember.
Yeah, it's very sensitive. If I answered that question, I still can't get that acronym right. But again, that was a very small portion of funding for a very large project.
Yeah. We also evaluated the Ballston.
Shirlington. Yep, thank you. Shirlington's a maintenance facility for Arlington Transit. So, I mean, we really have only evaluated a handful of projects as major expansion over 4 years.
Yes, it feels like if the number of projects is small, and then looking at the ones that were funded, it's not surprising because of the weights that are putting into congestion mitigation, which transit excels in, helping economic development to get to jobs. So seeing the weights in smart scale, not surprising. That's where things fell out.
And to Dr. Smoot's point earlier in the day, these have now been revised as part of updates to the smart scale policy. So, if we can show you the data that shows it really doesn't have an impact, a significant impact, doesn't have any really impact on what's scored and prioritized. If we leave it in there, then we have to go revisit it anyway because we created, I think in the policy, we created a tie to smart scale.
Yeah.
And so I think we looked at that, we're like, okay, we have to update it, but really hasn't done anything for us. And
look at it, would it have any impact with the current smart scale rankings, which I can't remember off the top of my head, sorry if I can't.
Are you asking if we analyze the projects as though they were under the new paradigm? No, we did not look at that, no.
Would it make any difference?
It would make differences really just around the edges. I mean, it's just, what they did was they I think the category C and D now has land use weight, whereas previously it didn't, and then the other ones have been tweaked by 5 or 10 percentage points here and there. So across 6 factor areas, it will not have a huge impact on selected scores.
I don't have any complaints about it. So, I mean, I'd still love to see those scoring to say, but anything that we can do to differentiate, in my opinion, I don't know how DRPT staff feels, but we do need to have some separation from smart scale. I just think that other scoring or funding mechanisms should be separate because it may give some advantages that smart scale may.
Yeah, and, earlier I mentioned that those 6 factor areas, they're established in the code for transit capital, but the measures we use are specific to transit, and we felt like that was, we spent a lot of time in this group talking about that because, the measures for those 6 factor areas for smart scale have to be able to evaluate a broad spectrum of projects where, for this, we're looking at a more consistent set of projects, and so we can look at things a little differently. So I hear you. We have a certain tie because we have the same factor areas, but we've already differentiated ourselves from it, and I think we can make the case that using this typology and stratification makes sense with hundreds of projects, but it doesn't make sense with a handful of projects each year. In having any influence whatsoever on what gets prioritized or selected.
Yeah, I think for me, if we're going to remove weight, it's not that it doesn't change the scoring, it doesn't further achieving the goals of the outcome.
Exactly.
So if that's the basis, if that statement is true based on you're looking at data, then we're still addressing the congestion mitigation, the economic development, accessibility, the state code things, so that's getting us to why transit's good.
I will put a caveat though, but when you start helping, small urbans and rurals with applications, we may change our mind. I do want to put that in there because if we've got a big enough application because y'all have helped us with a lot of the legwork, and then we're like slowly behind GRTC and HRT and other folks, and we reserve the right to come back and complain.
Well, keep in mind that the code and the CTV policy require that we revisit this every 3 years. We're on 4 years right now because we had the COVID pause, but I mean, that's there for a reason.
Yep.
So that we, and every year, like Grant said when we got started this morning, every year the TSDAC meets once to evaluate what happened in that year.
Yep.
And so this is really a continuous improvement process for us. So, you know, anytime you try to do anything like this, there can be unintended outcomes and things can change, and that's why we do that.
Okay, I think there's one more slide.
The last slide is introduction to the open discussion.
I think we've had for the last couple of hours.
And Dan, I just want to note for the record, you thought number 7 was going to have more discussion than
I did.
6, and I messed with you again.
No, that's fine. You all have defied my expectations. So yeah, this is just an opportunity for to bring up any issues that you all see that we have not brought to this group's attention through these proposed changes, and to just talk about anything else that going to be ordered.
Is there a location, Mr. Chair, sorry,
Okay.
for a minute. Is there a location for all the former, just like Smart Scale has all the applications beforehand, for old projects? Is there a source to look at all other applications for merit?
All other, what do you mean? The
Like
ones that were
previous
not?
ones that were,
Oh, yeah, yes.
that were selected?
So yeah, if you go to our merit website on the DRPT
Okay,
main page,
they're all there.
they're there, yeah. You have to navigate to the capital and operating page. You'll find them at the
Is it
bottom.
winners and not winners?
Yeah, in the SGR and minor enhancement programs, it shows the solid red line. For the major expansions,
We do the scorecards.
the scorecards, but we only for funded ones. And so if everything that has not been funded has been deemed ineligible, actually.
Okay.
So there was nothing that's scored too low because of the way that the program is working.
And the reason why I asked that question when we're developing our grant applications, even like with Smart Scale, it's good to be able to see who did not do well, just so we don't follow what they did, and then those who did well and got it. So that's just some other pieces.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, on the Smart Scale portal, you can go out there and you can actually look at somebody else's application.
We can't.
What Dan's saying is all of the information about all the projects and how they were scored is on our webpage, but the application themselves, they're not out there.
Okay.
So it's a big, list of all the projects and the prioritization of them.
So we'd have to ask you for the application if I wanted to see somebody.
Yeah. We've never had that request.
But you can. We are working on, and we can show you this in a future meeting. We have a new open data portal, which has it's a visualization of our 6-year program. So for each project that's in we have 22, maybe 21 and 22 out there. You can go out there and you can, you get the map of where it's located. You get a lot more information about the project. And so that's kind of our next step as we look to have more transparent information available. I think it's no secret that we've had some problems with our internal systems, and our Olga, she's come back to life, but she's got some age on her. We're going to be replacing our technology backbone for our applications. And so that to me is a good point that, as we put together what that new platform looks like, the ability to see other applications, it's all public information.
Yeah.
There's nothing secret, there's nothing proprietary, that makes sense.
Helps with the copy paste job.
So, yeah. We can point you to good ones and not good ones.
Chair?
Yes.
Could I just ask for a quick synopsis of sort of where we started? So going back to slide 5 independently, so I don't know where it is. It's the state of good repair graphic that I love. And then the minimum, with the recommendations that we've now discussed. When you looked at this lovely graphic I'm pointing, could you just do like the quick synopsis, quick notes of what your recommended changes are, just to connect the dots back for me and all?
Sure. Yeah, so you're talking about these, correct?
Yep. This and then the next one, which would be the minor, just sort of overlaying what your recommended changes are to remind us.
And I will likely need to also reference the following slide, also that has the additional consideration.
Yep.
Okay, so, yes, for state of good repair, the asset condition score will still be up to 60 points. However, what we're recommending in here is to start stratifying them at 80% instead of 95. That is not illustrated in this slide.
Yep, that's why I wanted the synopsis.
Yes, exactly, you're welcome. And then within the service impact score, this would be, so there's two ways of approach. We could consider the incentive points to be part of service impact scores, or we can consider it to be a completely separate scoring category. But the service impact score would be up to 40 points without the incentives, and then 10 points with the incentive points. So it would be 50 points would go into the state of good repair score, plus 60 for a total of up to 110. That is a very high level. Is that high enough?
I was looking for just to tie it back.
So then here, I'm just going to repeat myself. This is also going to go up to 50 points, 40 points for the service impact within these same categories that have, newly assigned and newly stratified kind of qualified measures, or qualitative measures within them, and then 10 points for the incentive scoring. And then on the next slide, not this one, keep going, much more. That one, yeah. And then we're proposing replacing, go back to the one with additional consideration. I think it's the next slide. Yes, this one. Oh, yeah, that one. Replacing this with a new kind of paradigm for incentive points, which assigns 5 points in new categories, which are not illustrated here. Those are the zero emissions vehicles, innovation, customer safety and security around customer facilities, and agency accountability, where a total of 5 points are available within each of those if they hit one of the characteristics. And then under the agency accountability one, it's if they hit all of the requirements. We get a max of 10. So no one project would get more than 10 points. That is the high level. And then for the major, the two recommendations were to, the one recommendation was to kind of do away with this weighting, and then go back one more slide. In here, we were talking about changing the definitions within the two accessibility measures, but we haven't landed on a final conclusion there yet.
Thank you. That was helpful for me, but I thought it'd also be helpful for anybody watching to have the list of.
Yeah.
You, Dan.
You're welcome.
Summary.
Okay.
Great.
Wide-ranging and comprehensive discussion. Good.
Nice.
So, Mr. Chair, just, I guess in terms of next steps before we get to the public comment, the next meeting for TSDAC is scheduled on May 13th, Friday the 13th.
Done.
So, like this meeting, I'll send around the agenda a week in advance with the presentations. And also, before then, I'll send around the meeting notes, as well as I think we owe you guys some information as well. So I'll just package that up in one email to you all. Hopefully I'll be able to get it to you soon.
Well, thank you for that earlier distribution of materials.
Sure. Would you all prefer, I know it was mentioned that the slide numbers were a little bit different because we sent them out individually. Would you all prefer that we consolidate the PowerPoint so it's the exact same? Would that be easier to follow along?
I think if you know that that's what you're going to be, that's the way you're going to be presenting it, sure.
Okay.
But
Okay.
It feels like it'll be easier for you all too. I won't go slide 2 and you're trying to fix it.
Okay. We'll try to do that.
So May 13th is our, did you send out a?
Yeah, you should have a calendar.
Should be all right.
I didn't have the date, so it may be me.
I have it on my calendar.
second Friday of each month, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it may be me. I'll double check. I,
Should have.
for today, so I was like,
You've even accepted it.
yeah. Here's how it looks on my,
Oh, sorry.
I also don't have it for June.
My calendar's a hot mess, so don't count on me. All right, so I think that's
that's all we have. And
public
so,
comment.
public comment, I know there are a few questions that came in.
And Chair, one just minor thing, I would just ask if staff could look at the May, work plan. It's a robust agenda, but I think we just put more capital back on.
I think that's why we've got that float in the later part of the summer, so.
Still want to do strategic plans as early as possible, but I may just have caused us to bump it myself.
So I do know that we've had a number of questions that have come in the chat during the conduct of the meeting. We will follow up with those individuals and their questions separately. It just was, like there's a lot of discussion amongst TSDAC, and so this body needs to have that conversation, but Dr. Smith is online and has sent a number of questions, and there are a couple of other folks as well. So we will reach out to them individually with follow-up with regard to those questions. But we do, aside from those questions, which we'll take care of offline, have the opportunity for public comment as well.
And will you send those to us, the
Just let me
questions?
know.
Absolutely.
I thought.
Miriam, do we have anybody that wants to make a public comment?
If anybody would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand and listen to the panel or type out your question.
There's a fair number of our staff that are watching as well. All right. Yeah, those are questions. All right, we'll take care of them. We'll follow up with the questions. I think we're good.
Well, if that being the case, if anybody has anything they'd like to comment before we close that? No? Nothing. Thank you very much, Grant, Dan, for everything presenting and directing. Appreciate everything. And look forward to see you all in May.